across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow. There's so much news to get through here. We will, of course, have a little focus on what is happening with Keir Starmer, a little matter of a kind of two-state solution, peace deal with a terrorist organisation. Israel have now accused Keir Starmer of giving in to terrorism, rewarding Hamas over his threat to recognise Palestine unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and allows UN aid into Gaza. Can you find the logic in it? What is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? I'm all ears at this end. Lines are open. Also this afternoon, knife crime in London has nearly doubled under Sadiq Khan. Tell us something we didn't know. With the West End now a hotspot, while just 5% of robberies were solved last year. I mean, this is such a grim analysis. This is the fella that if you said to Sadiq Khan in his robotic AI response fashion, he'd just say, diversity is our greatest strength. And a migrant who entered the UK with grotesque child abuse images gave a thumbs up as he walked free from court with just a suspended sentence. This place has seriously lost the plot. Everything you need to know. We'll have all the breaking news, and there's always some. 0344 499 1000. Help me out here. I'm going to obviously throw out the obvious question. What is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? I make this point every day, and I made it yesterday when we had a very eminent barrister on with us talking about the Israeli position and the nonsense of recognising Palestine as a legitimate state stroke country, etc. And of course, I'm fully aware that you could have a scholar of Middle East studies who would come on and tell you the very opposite. And I can't really think of a debate. I've done this job longer than most people, and I can't honestly think of all the divisive issues that are out there, whether it's sort of Brexit or COVID or whatever it is. I can't think of one that so perfectly divides the room. And I don't mean divides it 50-50. I don't think it does that. But it certainly divides it in the emphatic nature of people's arguments depending on which side they are on. And you can interview an Israeli scholar, you can interview a Palestinian scholar. They will cite the same dates and timelines and points of history, but will belch out completely different interpretations of events. And it's those deeply entrenched positions that I've never been able to kind of circumnavigate. And it's one of those areas, you think, well, unless you're a scholar of the Middle East, you might think, you know, stay out of this and allow the experts to give you all the opinion and information you need. But while the experts divide so passionately on either side around the very same issue, talking about the very same chronology of the area and the region, you scratch your head and you think, well, what the hell am I supposed to believe on this? So there's that as a kind of backdrop to all of this. But there is, I think, with this particular situation, something slightly bamboozling, regardless of what side you're on. And I'd like to acknowledge this. I'm going to lift the words of journalistic colleague Andrew Neil on this one, because he put it brilliantly in a very simple post on X last night. So maybe you can come at it from this position. He's not the only one that's thrown this up, but he just put it rather well. And he says this: the British government position over recognising Palestine is unravelling fast tonight, or at least bereft of logical explanation. From official UK government statements, it seems that Keir Starmer's position is that if a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel is reached because Hamas release all the hostages, the UK will not recognise Palestine. So not sure what's in it for Hamas, but if no ceasefire is reached because Hamas refuses to release all the hostages, the UK will recognise Palestine, brackets, whatever that means. Talk about perverse incentives, he says. With Starmer in Downing Street and Lammy at the Foreign Office, they are increasingly the keystone cops of UK foreign policy. So that very simple point is, I think, where this sort of discussion begins, really, trying to fathom the logic. What is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestinian pledge? What we do know is the minute that Starmer announced this, all hell broke loose. The United States divorced any kinship with the UK on this point, and Israel's rejection came literally within about 110 seconds of Keir Starmer making this point. Just after he'd finished speaking, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posted a fiercely worded denunciation on social media. It's funny how the world now sort of exists on social media. You know, he's posted it on it. Something that once upon a time was just for geeks. Geeks and liars, really. But now it's everywhere. Well, it's still geeks and liars, really. We're talking about politicians. Netanyahu said this: Starmer rewards Hamas's monstrous terrorism and punishes its victims. A jihadist state on Israel's border today will threaten Britain tomorrow. Appeasement towards jihadist terrorists always fails. It will fail you too. It will not happen. So there's his point, that not only is this perverse and unfathomable, he uses the word monstrous terrorism. He's talking about harass, and that's the bit, isn't it? I mean, to me, it doesn't actually tick any of the boxes. If you look at all the boxes that need to be ticked to be recognised as a state, then I'm struggling to find anywhere that it does that. And if you look at the conventions that are usually required when it comes to is it the Montevideo Agreement, where you get the idea of what a state needs to be? It's got to have a stable government, stable borders, it's, you know, all of that. Then it doesn't even reach that criteria. Forget about whatever your passionate moral argument is or your idea of trying to achieve peace. So we'll take some comment on that, please. What is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? Details 0344 499 1000. Leave a voice note there as well. If you want to leave a pithy and very succinct message and bypass the queues, leave a voice note on that number 0344 499 1000. We've got a trio of voices we're going to be speaking to in just a bit on this very point. Before we do, let's speak to Chloe Dobbs, political commentator, a regular with us on the programme. Afternoon to you, Chloe.
Afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with
back
us.
after you were missing last week.
Yeah, missing in action somewhere. I can't even remember. It was so good what I did. I can't even remember what it was. There you go. That is the rock and roll life of working here at Talk, of course. And I'm off for another 3 days after this. So more of that later. But first, back to Keir Starmer. Let's have a listen to what he said yesterday.
I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
Reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. To be honest, Chloe, I suppose the only thing we're really asking here is, can you find the logic in Mr. Starmer's argument here?
No, there was almost no logic to it whatsoever. I mean, what is very clear to me is that he has fallen for the Hamas propaganda. He said there that Israel needs to take significant steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza. There he's referring to the aid situation, and just after that clip, after it was cut off there, he says that Israel needs to allow the UN to continue distributing aid. The UN is perfectly capable of distributing aid. They're simply not doing it. I mean, Israel have to try and counter this Hamas propaganda about the aid situation. They've clearly put out drone footage and brought in journalists to show them the pallets and pallets of aid that are sat there rotting in the sun, that Israel has allowed in, that the UN hasn't picked up. And someone yesterday, I'll tell you the figures because I think this is astonishing. These are the UN's figures from their monitoring and tracking dashboard. You can go in and see how many crates, how many pallets of aid have been offloaded and how many have actually been picked up by the UN. And from the start of July, there have been over 17,000 pallets of aid dropped off. But less than 8,000 of those pallets have actually been picked up. So around 60% of those pallets of aid that have been dropped off, the UN is just leaving there to rot in the sun. There's loads of baby food there that can be fed to the starving children. They are not picking it up. And nearly all, about 90% of the few pallets that they did pick up, on their own figures, the UN's figures, are being intercepted by people like Hamas terrorists who steal that aid and sell it to people at extortionate prices so that they can keep on funding their war and keep the population obedient, because they won't let you buy the food off them if you aren't obeying them, right? Hamas and the UN are the ones to blame here. But you've got Keir Starmer stood there, who's clearly only read a few headlines and not actually looked at the figures, and he thinks that Israel is on purpose starving all of these children in Gaza. He's an idiot, and I really think that what he said yesterday, it feels to me like it could be a career-ending moment for him. I mean, I know his approval ratings are terrible enough as it is, but this has infuriated everybody on both sides. The people who are pro-Israel are saying, you're literally, rewarding terrorists here and encouraging Hamas. I mean, you said that, you referred to it as perverse incentives. It encourages Hamas not to release the hostages and not to lay down their arms, what he has said. And then the people who are very pro-Palestine are saying you should be recognising a Palestinian state regardless. You shouldn't be using that as a bargaining chip and saying you might recognise one, you might not. So this is disastrous. I think this is probably the perfect example of someone trying to please everybody but consequently pleasing nobody.
I said at the beginning, it's always been, by definition, it's a very divisive issue, and depending on which scholar you speak to, they'll give you different interpretations of it. But there are some irredeemables in all of this. As far as I understand it, back 90 years or whatever it was, certain conventions about what constitutes a state. I think there's sort of 3 or 4 kind of big criteria there that you're meant to hit. One is a stable government. Well, I mean, there is no stable government. There's 2 authorities, a PLO, of course, in the West Bank, and then there's Hamas running the show on the Gaza Strip. Now, that's not a stable government. Firstly, it's not one government, it's 2. One of them is a terrorist organisation. So how does even that, on that point alone, if nothing else, we can get into the issues around, you know, whether it has a stable population, border issues. Again, these are boxes you're supposed to tick before you can even be talked about as a state. It doesn't even hit any of that, and that's putting aside the moral arguments around what's been happening.
Well, first of all, I couldn't help but think there when you said border issues might mean you don't qualify to be a state. I thought, oh, maybe the UK doesn't qualify to be one.
Yeah.
But second of all, taking the decision to recognise a country as a state is usually something that is given as a reward for that state taking significant steps to, you know, become a proper democracy, to respect human rights, treat their people well. And Keir Starmer's statement, the terms on which he's going to recognise a state, I mean, it kind of does the complete and utter opposite. He could have stood there and said, we will recognise the state of Palestine if and when Hamas agrees to end its rule in Gaza. Not just release the hostages, but end its rule in Gaza. Step down and let the Arab states who are now, you know, wanting to come in and set up a stable government there, let them do that. Then we will recognise the state. Why is he putting the onus on Israel?
So, it's extraordinary. And that would be... Everybody would support Starmer on that point. They would go, OK, no, it's back to the obvious 2-state solution issue. We know that's not easy. But the order of words used and the intent would have been sound, even if it eventually came to nothing. Yeah, release the hostages, Hamas stand down, and then, you know, we can bring in all the various parties that are needed to make this happen. Very simple.
Yeah, and Starmer, he did, because he didn't want to come across too pro-Hamas in that speech. He did talk about releasing the hostages. He did get the word right that time. He didn't say sausages. And he did talk about Hamas laying down their arms. But ultimately, it was very clear that his message was, in the end, this is about Israel. Israel are the ones who are starving kids, and Israel are the ones that need to agree to a ceasefire. Israel have said time and time again, every time a ceasefire deal is proposed, we had Egypt put one forward some time ago. Israel has said, we won't agree to this ceasefire deal unless it says that Hamas lays down their arms and ends their rule in Gaza. That's the only way you end up with a long-term end to this. Israel is absolutely ready for a ceasefire as long as Hamas lays down their arms. It's Hamas who keeps saying, no, we are not going to do that. Why aren't we blaming Hamas? Why is Israel getting the blame for literally everything in this war? It's crazy.
Yeah. Let's move to this story. We're going to take calls and voice notes on that issue of the logic behind the Palestinian pledge from Keir Starmer. 0344 499 1000. I just want to get this story in as well. Knife crime in London surged 86% in the last decade. The West End seeing more offences than 15% of the rest of the capital combined. Shockingly, just 5% of robberies, 0.6% of street thefts were solved last year. I mean, it is bad. You wonder who's running the show. Oh, I remember who's running the show. Pretty much for the best part of that decade. Sadiq Khan. Let's have a reminder what a recent visitor to this country said about Mr. Khan.
I'm not a fan of your mayor. Why not? I think he's done a terrible job, the mayor of London. But a nasty person. I think he's done. I think he's
a friend of mine, right?
No, I think he's done a terrible job. But I would certainly visit London. Yeah.
I love that. He's a friend of mine. No, we've still done a terrible job. Very honest stuff, Chloe, from Donald Trump.
Yeah, very honest, and I'm glad that Donald Trump had the guts to say it. You know, he's the last time that Starmer met with Trump when they went and sat in the Oval Office, I think Trump was being very careful to be very kind to Starmer and not to criticise him or his policies. But in Scotland, I mean, I thought it was quite embarrassing for Keir Starmer, to be honest, because you not just had him going after his mate Sadiq Khan, but you also had Trump going after net zero, immigration, and all sorts, really putting Keir Starmer in his place. And you can see Keir Starmer just sat there really, really awkwardly. And you might say it's harsh for Trump to call Sadiq Khan a nasty person, but two things. Firstly, Sadiq Khan has said horrible things about Trump, worse things about Trump, so he deserves it. But second of all, he deserves it because, as you've said, knife crime is up 86% in the last decade and up 60% in just the last 3 years. So clearly it's the last few years where we've really seen a big uptick in this. And Sadiq Khan, I genuinely believe he does not care. I don't think it's the case that he really cares about this, but he's just being a bit incompetent at executing a solution to this issue. You never hear him talking about knife crime.
You
always
don't.
Just talking about diversity and pride and Islamophobia. He doesn't care about kids being stabbed to death.
Reading from sort of that again, Starmer does the same thing. These kind of pre-prepared, vacuous platitudes that are wheeled out, wanging on about diversity as if that's the sort of catch-all answer to any question. It's almost like an old Monty Python sketch or something, where whatever you ask him, he will say, diversity is our greatest strength. And you think, well, no, that's not the... Get annoyed about kids dying, Sadiq. Get really animated about crime on your street. The Met Police are up against it, and you are essential, as the Mayor of London, you're essentially the Police and Crime Commissioner of London as well. And naff all is being done about it. 86% surge in knife crime, and it's under his watch. He can't run away from that. Listen, Chloe, stay with us. We'll have more from Chloe Dobbs in just a second. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The Pacific tectonic plate, which is a huge, dense piece of rock, which is being forced underneath the continental plate, the Asian continental plate, at 3 inches a year. Now, that might not sound very much, but with the mass that's being pushed there and the build-up of tension means that in this region, this part of the Pacific Rim of Fire, where this happens, you get build-up of incredible tensions and you get a sudden release.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. Loads of comments coming through. We'll go to some of your messages in just a second. Chloe Dobbs is with us. Let's get a word then on this story, Chloe. This just come through as well. England and Wales population surges by 703,000 in a year as migration drives second biggest rise. This is the ONS figures. Over 700,000 in a year, reaching 61.8 million by June last year. Net migration drove nearly all of the increase, with births and death contributing very little to the growth. I mean, there it is. It's a fairly open point on which to talk about this. It's down to migration and nothing else.
Yeah, and it's no surprise. I mean, we saw the figures for what the whole of the UK, where we had over 900,000 net migration one year, and then we had, what, 745,000, and then seeing for just England and Wales alone, it's 703,000. It's just absolutely crazy. Now, I can't put the blame on Keir Starmer for this figure as much as I'd like to, because that is the year up to June 2024, i.e. just before the general election. But let's ask ourselves, has Keir Starmer, in the year that he has been in power, taken any steps to really start bringing down the figures? And the answer is no. They've decided to put together some white paper about immigration. They've been talking about what they're going to do, but a year in, I mean, start taking some action, guys. We did see the net migration figures start for at least for the UK as a whole, start to drop dramatically after they came into power, but that had nothing to do with Labour. They did try to boast about it and act like it was them, but that was simply because of what the Tories brought in, which was increasing the salary threshold and making it more difficult for students, for example, to bring over like every single member of their family. That meant the figures really started to come down. But I don't think the figure is still way too high. You know, if we're talking about 500,000 versus 1 million net migration, it's still absolutely huge, and Labour needs to go much further. And I think just telling us over and over again, we've put out a white paper, we're thinking about it, when you've been here for a year, it's just not good enough, and the public have had enough. They need to see this as a proper emergency and a crisis, and take really tenacious, strong, quick action on it.
Spot on. And kind of tying in on the immigration theme, it's another story of a migrant entering the UK with horrendous child abuse videos. This was a man from Yemen, Osama al-Haddad, caught at Heathrow with 3 grotesque child abuse videos. Also another video of a man having sex with a goat, for goodness sake. He admitted making indecent images but avoided jail due to fear of being forced to fight for the Houthis in Yemen, like anyone gives a toss. And this guy has managed not only to avoid jail, avoid deportation, but also gave a nice thumbs up. How do you deal with a goat botherer like someone like this, a deeply disturbed pervert? And he's allowed to stay.
This is just disgusting, and we get one of these stories almost every single day now. I mean, I think Mike Graham calls it migrant of the day.
Indeed.
It never ends, right? But this one is particularly disgusting in that, you know, a lot of the people who are concerned about illegal migration, they raise concerns about people like paedophiles potentially coming into this country and being allowed to stay. And we get told, oh no, you're just coming up with conspiracy theories, they're not going to be paedophiles. But clearly some of them are, including this bloke. And I'm sorry, but if you're a paedophile, I don't give a damn about your human rights. I don't give a damn if you're worried about how you're going to be treated in Yemen. Off you go, back home. I'm not worried about him not being given a prison sentence, because I don't want him in our prisons, right? I don't want him costing the taxpayer and taking up a space that could be used for a Brit who needs to be behind bars. Just kick him out the country. Send him back to Yemen. I don't care. It's just unbelievable how soft touch we are, and this sends a strong message to people considering crossing the channel or, you know, coming here by another illegal means, that if you come here, even if you commit disgusting crimes, you'll be able to stay because your human rights will come at the top. Doesn't matter what you do.
This one's a clue. I don't care whether he's forced to fight for the Houthis or anyone else for that matter. He's a dirty old pervo that shouldn't be in this country. I mean, this is really simple stuff. You don't even need a lawyer to work that one out. Maybe it ties in, though. It's a sort of mentality that snakes its way around our institutions and our systems. And there is a curious juxtaposition with this next story. NHS trust budget nearly 2 million, spent 2 million quid for woke staff events, including International Pronouns Day and talks on embracing your afro hair and breaking the rainbow ceiling. 2 million quid on this stuff. And anyone that sat around a table at a meeting and said, I think we need to have an Embrace Your Pronouns Day, an International Pronouns Day. Anyone who comes up with that, the boss should have gone, yeah, thanks for your time, you're fired, get out. I mean, who's coming up? This is the NHS, for God's sake. They're meant to make people better.
They are meant to make people better, and the serious part about this story is not just that money is being wasted on this woke ridiculousness and these woke events, is that time is crucially being wasted. So it's been estimated that 26,000 NHS working hours have been lost to staff attending these woke events. My understanding is that they can go to one of these events as part of their paid hours, right? It's not something they do after work for fun optionally,
No.
right? You can be paid whilst attending it when you could literally be treating a patient. I mean, how on earth can you justify that when you've agreed to the Hippocratic oath as a doctor, that you're going to do the best to keep your patients alive? You're more interested in learning about diversity and embracing people's afros than actually helping patients. I mean, that's just crazy to me, that the NHS would even allow that. And I think that this woke plague is very much still alive and kicking in the NHS, even after that Supreme Court judgment, which we thought brought a little bit of sanity to the NHS. There's clearly still this
Indeed. Another one was
mindset amongst many of the staff.
Embracing asexuality was another day. You could have gone on one of those little, I don't know what they did on that day. Probably not very much by all accounts. Who knows? But listen, Chloe, great to have you on as ever. Chloe Dobbs, political commentator. Thank you to her. Over to you. 0344 499 1000. You can leave a voice note on that number as well. The kind of lead question, naturally, on the back of what is happening with our slightly upside down government. What is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? If you can find the logic, and I said this to Julia and we were talking off air as well, whether you're, I don't know, Brexit or something is an obvious one. You can, if you're a Remainer, or a leaver, you can kind of, you fundamentally disagree, obviously, with the other side, but you can go, well, OK, I understand their logic, I just fundamentally disagree with it. And that's the way, discourse and battles should be done. You respect someone else's opinion. You don't want to kill them for it. But they, as far as you're concerned, they got it wrong. With this, I can't find the logic. We've got 3 guests coming up. Former Mayor of Jerusalem as well is going to be with us to maybe put some meat on the bones of this. What is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. So many comments coming in. We've got loads on the crime story as well. We'll come to that in a few moments' time. Now, Israel has accused the Prime Minister of giving in to terrorists after he pledged to recognise Palestine statehood under certain conditions. As Keir Starmer says, Britain will acknowledge Palestine unless Israel allows UN aid into Gaza and agrees to a ceasefire deal. It comes as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt call on Hamas to disarm and hand over control of Gaza. The first time Arab nations have publicly condemned this group. In a moment, we'll speak to Ashok Kumar, also Lance Foreman joining us as well. But first, Fleur Hassan Nuam, who's with us, Israel Foreign Ministry Special Envoy and former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Good afternoon to you. Your response, firstly, if you would, on Mr. Starmer's announcement yesterday of recognising Palestine as a state.
Well, the first thing I would ask Starmer is what exactly is Palestine the state? Where are its borders? Who is he recognizing as the legitimate leader of the Palestinian people? He said he doesn't want Hamas. Does he have an alternative? And what about in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank? Does he recognize Mahmoud Abbas, who hasn't had an election in 20 years and who pays pensions to terrorists who kill Israelis? Exactly what delusion of a state does he have? That's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is that unfortunately now he's given Hamas zero incentive to actually come to the table and sign a ceasefire, because all they have to do is wait till September, and then they get a win for doing nothing, not disarming, not stopping to use their own people as human shields, and not releasing our hostages.
I mean, that was the point, and I was saying earlier, Fleur, that when people argue and have different, very entrenched positions, as civilized people, we might disagree fundamentally, emphatically, but we try to understand, OK, that's your position, I get it. But I can't quite work out that if no ceasefire is reached because Hamas refused to release all the hostages, the UK will then recognise Palestine as a state. Now, I don't understand that. If you read that somewhere, you would assume someone has written it down incorrectly.
Well, exactly. Imagine if you would have said this instead. Imagine if it was said, we want the Palestinian leadership to give up, murderous terrorism. We want them to stop paying pensions to terrorists, renounce the idea of destroying the state of Israel, and release the hostages. And then we'll say yes to statehood. That would make a bit more sense, because then you're incentivizing terrorists to give up terrorism. What he's done is incentivize them to keep going, to keep using their people as pawns and as shields, and to not release our hostages. If we had a difficult time trying to reach a ceasefire agreement with Hamas last week, this week, thanks to Keir Starmer, it's even harder.
Where do you see this going? I mean, Keir Starmer isn't, rightly or wrongly, he's not alone in this, of course. You know, the French, Emmanuel Macron, ahead of Starmer on this same point. There are other countries. Do you, again, trying to fathom logic, I don't know whether the French president's logic was the same, or lack of logic, whatever, however you want to look at it, as Mr. Starmer's. Is there thinking that if there is a body of international of countries and there is an international pressure on Israel, then somehow something might crack and a peace deal will be done? Is that loosely the thinking?
Well, with all due respect to Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, at the end of the day, Trump said it best. They can say anything they want. But if the Americans aren't supporting it, and if the majority of the world aren't supporting it, and in fact, even the moderate Muslim countries are only supporting it if Hamas ends its rule in Gaza, which is a condition that the Sunni moderate Arab countries have put, but not Keir Starmer. So then this is all very performative. And so then you ask yourself, OK, if it's performative, who is it performing for? And my opinion is that it's performing for the Islamists, growing Islamist problems in the UK and France, and to the very woke left MPs sitting in the UK Parliament, and Macron, who has a non-functional government because he's gotten into bed with the extreme left. So that's really who you're performing for, because everything else is empty and just making our lives, the only democracy in the Middle East, much, much harder.
And it kind of comes to something when Qatar and Saudi Arabia, hardly bastions of human rights issues, are actually going further than democratic governments like the United Kingdom. They're saying you need to disarm. We need to sort this out.
The Qatar, surprise, surprise, and Saudi are saying Hamas can no longer rule Gaza in order for there to be a path to peace or a two-state solution. Keir Starmer didn't say that. That's ridiculous. Keir Starmer just put conditions on Israel, which are ridiculous conditions. Like you said, anybody reading that would have thought that they made a mistake. And that's what we have. Again, I think it's performative. It's very damaging for us. But ultimately, thank God that the United States have got some moral clarity on this issue, and they're not going to be advancing it. And without them, really, it has zero legs.
Well, Fleur, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Fleur Hassan Nahum, who is the Israeli Foreign Ministry Special Envoy, former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Let's get a word from Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor at Birkbeck University. Regularly helps us out on these kind of issues. Ashok, good afternoon to you. Give us your overview of this slightly unfathomable position that Keir Starmer has wheeled out. What do you think he's thinking?
Well, there's a few contradictory positions. Thanks, Ian, for having me on again. The first part is that he says, we need a two-state solution, but then he says, we will recognize Palestine in September only on the condition that Israel stops its campaign of starvation in Gaza. Sorry, by that point, every man, woman, and child in Gaza will have starved to death. The second contradiction is that, along with David Lammy and Emily Thornberry, in the beginning of this campaign of Israel against Gaza, repeatedly affirmed the right of Israel to cut off food and electricity. He said it's their right. And he's never had to contend with that. He's never had to explain that. He's sanctioned this horror show, and now he's turning around and saying there needs to be, and saying they should stop doing that. He needs to be held accountable to that. And the last point I'll say is this. Ultimately, the recognition of Palestine means nothing when the people of Palestine are being consciously and deliberately killed in their hundreds of thousands and being systematically starved in their millions by Israel. I mean, the remaining people, some estimates, The Lancet says that it's actually not 2.2 million people. There's only 1.8 million people remaining in Gaza because Britain, under Starmer, continues to give Israel diplomatic cover, refuses to expel the ambassador. We continue to train Israeli forces. We run reconnaissance missions over Gaza on behalf of Israel. And we provide military equipment, including parts to the F-35, which is used over Gaza to commit daily atrocities, including dropping 2,000 bombs that incinerate everything, every man, woman, and child within a 100-meter radius. So I'll just say that it's symbolic. It means nothing. There's actually material actions they could do, and they're not doing it. They're continuing to fuel this genocide.
And we can argue. I mean, there's lots of controversy about aid. You know, there's all sorts of videos that you would have seen them as well doing the rounds. And I know it depends on where somebody stands politically as to what they post, etc. On any side of a debate, you know, there's tons and thousands and thousands of tons of food just waiting to go, and it's not being allowed to get through. It's being stopped, and Hamas
It's being
is
stopped by Israel.
I mean,
it's being stopped by Israel.
Well, if that is, whatever the case is on that, the fundamental point, and we could argue that as a separate point, I get what you're saying. In terms of recognising or getting peace in this area, I mean, it can happen like that, of course. Hamas just simply release the hostages or, sadly, the deceased bodies of hostages. Then it's solved, it's done, everything's sorted. You've got Arab states around, as we said at the beginning, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, saying, look, you've got to disarm now and we can move our way to peace. You've also got the inconvenient issue that certain global conventions, I mentioned the Montevideo Convention back nearly 100 years ago, where this region doesn't even tick the box of becoming a state. So, I mean, it's all over the place, this, isn't it? Starmer's position, perhaps for different reasons than you gave, and noble as they may be, but there's nothing in this that could ever recognise Palestine as a state. It's got two governments, no one can define its borders, and it's a terror organisation.
Well, Palestine isn't a terror organization, even by Israel.
I'm talking about Hamas.
By Britain's definition. Yeah, look, I think the part of the reason why Palestine can't be recognized isn't because there's some kind of systemic geographic confines that's like embedded from 100 years ago. It's because Israel and the ICJ, the highest court in the world, found this about a year ago, that found Israel guilty of illegally occupying and annexing the West Bank and exploiting its resources. So we know that there's, you know, nearly 1 million settlers illegally occupying the West Bank. This was, you know, defined in breaking many accords, including Oslo Accord. And so this is in violation of international law. So there is no ability to have, like you said, state recognition, partly because of the systematic killing in Gaza and destruction of Gaza, but also the killing and exploitation and annexation of the West Bank, partly because of that's been happening over the last 2 years, but also the long-standing Israeli policy to violate international law and encroach on what could have been a state. So the viability of the two-state...
Would you recognise, though, Ashok, that this could be over if Hamas released those hostages and those bodies?
But the reason why that doesn't stand up to scrutiny is because there was a deal to release the Israeli hostages and the Palestinian, 10,000 Palestinian detainees, 2,000 of them without charge that are held in Israeli prisons, many of them children. there was a deal to have a hostage swap, and that deal, undeniably, and the Americans, who are basically the financiers of Israel, admitted this. Israel broke that ceasefire. There was a deal to trade the hostages, but Israel, because of the coalition government that exists in Israel, they saw this as the perfect opportunity to actually annex and destroy Gaza and expel the inhabitants of Gaza, the Palestinians who inhabit Gaza. So they didn't want to actually have the hostage deal follow through. This isn't some...
That is still their position. Their position is the same now, though. Release the hostages and the war stops. It's
then
simple.
Then why did they break the ceasefire? There was a deal on the table.
Well, you're talking about a like for like, you know.
No.
One Hamas terrorist versus an innocent person at a music festival.
No, I'm not saying that, Ian. Look, this isn't a contested point. There was a hostage. There was a ceasefire agreement.
Yes.
That hostage deal was going through. Israel broke it. So the idea that all they have to do is release the hostages and the war ends, that deal was broken.
Well,
by
they broke
Israel.
the deal because Hamas were not playing ball on the deal, is their position.
But nobody maintains that position. Not even the Americans.
Well, the Israelis maintain that position. Netanyahu maintains that position.
Israel is the only country. Which other country?
Well, it is the country that's involved, right? That is their position. Return the hostages, the war stops. They still have that position.
I know, but they broke that hostage deal precisely because that is a bait and switch. It's fantasy. The idea that release the hostages and we'll stop systematically murdering and destroying Gaza. You can't believe that. Even look, you just finished an interview right before now with the foreign minister envoy from Israel, and it was so softball. And you could have asked them, why is it that you broke the ceasefire deal? You didn't ask them
because
that is singing from the same hymn sheet. It was incredible. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like it.
Because
you were like finishing each other's sentences. You could have asked them that. Why didn't you ask them?
Because we were pursuing a different line in the interview, and I wanted to get to speaking to you. Otherwise, we'd have had 30 seconds with you, Ashok, and that would be an injustice for anybody.
That would be an injustice. You're right.
Listen, absolutely right. Listen, on that point, no conspiracy. We have to finish. Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor, Birkbeck University. Let's speak with Lance Foreman, former MEP, now businessman, got very strong views on this. Lance, you heard Ashok's last point there. His contention, I've heard it said by others, I don't think it fully stands scrutiny. Israel's position is still release the hostages and this thing will stop. He says they were doing that and then Israel scuppered it.
Well, that's complete and utter nonsense. And, we all know that this will be it's a very simple way to end the problems we have right now is for Hamas to release the hostages. They didn't need to take them in the first place. There was, a ceasefire on the 6th of October. They started this whole thing. It was a war that Israel's never wanted. And all of the international pressure from the 7th October onwards should have been on Hamas to release the hostages. And that would have not only ended the war, but it ended the suffering of the Palestinian people who have essentially themselves been held hostage by Hamas and are suffering, as are the Israelis and many others too. That's all we need to do is essentially release the hostages and this thing ends. And this idea that Ashok was saying was that Israel should be releasing prisoners. You're talking about convicted murderers and rapists that he's expecting Israel to release. This whole thing started because Yahya Sinwar, who was the mastermind behind October 7th, was one of those released prisoners in Israel who was released. He was one of 1,000 prisoners that were released in exchange for Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier. And then he went on to create this the worst massacre in Israel since the Holocaust. So I don't think the idea of handing over ransom to terrorists is a good strategy.
100%. I did try to put that very point to him, that it wasn't quite like for like when it came to who you're swapping hostages with. On the wider point, Keir Starmer yesterday, we will recognise Palestine as a state. Just looking at the statement that he made and the words that he used, Lance, yesterday, it looks to me, and I could have this completely wrong, that there is everything in this for Hamas, but very little in it for Israel.
Well, he's basically rewarding Hamas for terrorism. But quite frankly, Ian, his statement yesterday is nothing to do with the Middle East at all. This is political posturing. He's basically sticking up two fingers to the Jewish British community because the Muslim community is 20 times the size, and there are a lot more votes when you're 20 times bigger. And obviously, Corbyn and Sultana have split off. They've split the Labour vote, and Keir Starmer's doing what he can to hold on to it. And in the meantime, it's just disgusting. It's totally immoral, totally disgusting, and he's basically putting the world at risk purely for his own political ends. A statement was put out just in the last couple of hours by Emily Damari, who was a released hostage, and indeed, there's currently one of the hostages there at the moment, a living as hostage, to the best of our knowledge, whose mother is British.
Yeah.
And Keir Starmer looked in her eyes and promised that he absolutely promised solemnly that he will do everything he can to get the hostages released. And he's done completely the opposite.
Yeah.
He's basically said to Israel, unless you agree a ceasefire, which they've already agreed to, and Hamas have walked away with it, he's going to recognise Palestine. There's no pressure at all. In fact, quite the contrary. No pressure for Hamas to do anything whatsoever here.
Indeed.
It's just disgusting and shameful.
It's almost as if Keir Starmer doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. Goodness me, perish the thought. Lance, thank you very much indeed for your time. Lance Foreman, he's a former MEP, of course, now businessman with very big and passionate views on this area. You heard three voices, certainly one different, Ashok Kumar, who divides from the other two commentators we had. Over to you, 0344 499 1000.
His backbenchers basically are demanding recognition of Palestine. His frontbench team are not able to deliver that. They get a lot of earache and ear bashing from their backbenchers. He's done this just to tick the box of saying to his political party and to his cabinet and to his deputy prime minister that are all campaigning overtly against Keir Starmer. He's basically had to sort of appease them, and he hasn't done it once. He's done it before on many other issues. That guy's not a leader. He's literally just following what his party wants.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Ed in sunny Cornwall says, I'm glad you got sun, Ed. There's not a lot of that round here. So it's warm enough, but it's not summery. Thank you, Ed, who says, Chloe Dobbs for Prime Minister. She talks a lot of sense. She does indeed. She'll be back with us next week on the programme. Let's get a voice note on what is happening with Keir Starmer's slightly bizarre logic over the Palestinian question. This is James.
Trying to find any logic behind this Labour government will drive you insane, absolutely insane trying, so please don't. But I've got one idea. What they want to do is they want to wind the British people up even more. They want to wind us up even more. That's the only logical thing I can come out with.
Maybe it is that. On that issue of ineptitude, Warwick in Devon says, afternoon, Ian, there's no better example of two-tier justice than the difference between Lucy Connolly and the goat botherer, the immigrant who was able to stay in this country despite having child porn and bestiality on his phone. Starmer was across the detail of Connolly. It was down to him, and once again, he's a proven liar. Nasty man. Almost the words of Donald Trump. Thank you, Warwick, for that. Let's get a word on Starmer from Herbie in Harrow. Herbie, how you doing?
Yes, good afternoon, Ian. Very well, thank you. Well, the man's put the final nail in the coffin of our credibility with the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
He's spineless. He's a coward. He's called the emergency meeting while, the government's in recess. He's afraid of the truth, and he doesn't want to face it, does he? He really has got no hope in hell of getting anywhere with what he's doing.
What do you think
He's out of order.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is true, but what is... Again, it comes back to that question, Herbie. You know, when you try to work out someone's logic, even if you disagree with them, I just can't see the logic in what he's proposing here.
I don't know who's actually advising him, to be honest. I mean, to say he's completely gone off the rails, and he's putting this country in a terrible situation. I mean, so he got crisis after crisis. The emergency meeting should not have been on Gaza. It should have been on the state of this nation and this country as it stands today. That's what the emergency meeting should have been for, not for Gaza. I'm sorry, he's completely lost the plot. He's lost the plot.
Herbie, thank you very much indeed for that. Here comes one from Doc, who says, it's Darren in South Wales, if those idiots Starmer and Lammy recognise Palestine as a state, they will deal with Hamas as the government of the state. Really? Will they? In which case, they'll be dealing with a prescribed organisation. It's amazing what people in power will sacrifice in the belief that they will hold on to power. I won't swear, but I'm sure you can guess what I would like to say. Bang on from Darren. And again, we're trying to follow the logic. I mean, we have lots of we have debates every day. We have dozens of them on each show here on Talk. And sometimes the only reason you can have those debates is because you understand the position of the other person, even if it's nuts or just doesn't ring true to you. You understand the... With this, I just don't understand it, and I'm willing to be educated that, that's the bit I missed. Ian is down in London. What have you got for us, Ian? Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. I tell you, my ticker can't take much more of this time of what he does, I promise you.
I get it.
Basically, even like earlier on, Julia had a guest who I've got the greatest respect for in Tobias Ellwood, but he spoke absolute nonsense. After the Second World War, do you think they would have let the Nazis still carry on ruling Germany?
Yeah, it'd have been a bit weird, that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but you can't do this. How could they sort of make it all on Israel to sort of have a ceasefire? Don't worry about the hostages. Don't worry about them or anything else. It's just purely the one thing I would love to see, and I doubt very much you'd ever see it. I want to see the meeting, the minutes of that meeting yesterday, who voted for the proposal that they've come out with and who voted against it.
That would be interesting to know, wouldn't it? And how it came around. You know, you'd have to assume that a decision this big, and it's not just seismic, as you know, Ian, it would be historic. I mean, this is huge. That a British government is going to recognise this area currently run by a terrorist organisation as a state. I know there's another government in the PLO down there on the West Bank who are doing, other things. So that, I mean, it doesn't fit the criteria anyway of being recognised in that sense. But you'd have to assume that Starmer would have had round him the biggest legal brains that money could possibly buy, right? I mean, these are the government advisors in the Foreign Office who know their way around every international treaty, every organisation, all of the pitfalls and the hurdles, etc. You'd like to think those guys were in the room. So what were they saying to him when they came to this conclusion?
Have you ever seen my Yes Minister when they actually discussed the Middle East years ago?
Go on.
With Israel, and it was that the Foreign Office, I hate to say it, completely sort of like, we've got to do it for the Arabs. Forget about Israel, do it for the Arabs. And like Paul Eddington, that was the Prime Minister or the Minister at the time, he said, but no, don't worry about that. And it is that way. But the most ridiculous side to it is the one that is amazing is Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE,
Yes.
they all don't want Hamas there.
100%.
They all want them, and they actually came out of it yesterday.
So we now have a
there.
government that is more liberal than Qatar.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, and this it's brilliant that you reference Yes Minister, which gives you some idea of how long this nonsense has been going on. And of course, it even predates that. Brilliant call. Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. Ian down in London. Bruce in Lincolnshire, Starmer says he will recognise the two-state blah, blah, blah. When is he going to ask the UK what it wants and not dictate to us what we want? Oh, hang on. There's a name for a state dictated by a leader. We are sick to the back teeth with this absolute clown. How on earth do we get rid of him? Got to wait for the next election, but I tell you what, Bruce, it might come round sooner than is penciled in currently. We'll have more comment from you on the way, right on the other side of the news at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And welcome back. Yeah, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock right here at the home of Common Sense. Welcome to Talk. If you're new to this parish, by the way, and you've only just sort of stumbled across us over the last couple of days and maybe just this moment, you're very welcome. This is where common sense happens. This is where the home of free speech occurs. This is where real people get to air their views. The only place, the only genuine national sounding board for your opinions. There's a few stations out there that purport to do this, but they don't really. Not real views. That's what we're all about. Talking about a lot of things this afternoon. Israel accusing Prime Minister Keir Starmer of giving in to terrorism and rewarding Hamas over the threat to recognise Palestine unless Israel agree to a ceasefire and allow UN aid into Gaza. We'll have more on that. Loads of comment. Can you fathom the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? Is one of the questions we're asking here this afternoon. Also, Reform leader Nigel Farage says claims linking him to paedophile Jimmy Savile won't stop him defending free speech, as reports suggest the smear against Mr. Farage, which happened on TV yesterday, was actually orchestrated and coordinated by Number 10. We'll have more on that in a couple of moments. And the BBC is facing a fresh exodus of viewers, with even over 55s now turning to YouTube instead of traditional television, helping the platform overtake ITV to become Britain's second most watched service. Wow, what about that? But what are you watching, though? Us, I'd like to think. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. There's a lot of love for Chloe Dobbs. Chloe is one of our regular contributors, usually with us on a Wednesday or Tuesday or a Wednesday. Ellie says, wow, what a great interview with Chloe Dobbs. Please thank her on my behalf. I can't wait for this to be on YouTube so I can share it. Not a problem, Ellie. Thank you for that. Sue makes this point, reference Starmer, what an insult to the terror victims in this country and the Israeli hostages. The man is an absolute traitor. On the same point, Betty Ian says, Ian Starmer only speaking to Islington and the marginal seats that will ditch Labour for pro-Islamic parties the next election. They need to be removed. He's not reading the room, unless it goes back to that. I talked about it, was it yesterday or the day before? About those nightmares I have when you think, well, there's logical opinion and then there's sort of weirdness and then just sort of bizarre ideas that some people have, whether they're extremists or whether they're just nuts, one of the two. And you sometimes think, what if the logic that we talk about here, the common sense that we talk about, what if it turned out that we were just a small group and everyone else was right? And all the people that I meet, whether I meet them on the train or in the supermarket or whether I'm talking to you on the phones and the thousands of messages and voice notes that come through on a daily basis here at all, what if collectively we're all the small group and Starmer's right? By the way, I don't actually think that for one moment, but it is a kind of recurring dream. You wake up in having the sweats thinking, surely not, because you do wonder, what is Starmer trying to do? Is he trying to, does he think he can win the next election with these kind of curious positions on so many of the big issues of the day? Let's get a word on what is happening. Henry Hill, back with us, another regular on the programme, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Henry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with this. Big condemnation from Israel over what Keir Starmer announced yesterday, his plan to recognise Palestine. We threw the question out at the beginning, what is the logic behind Starmer's position on this? I've tried to look at it, and maybe there's one in there somewhere, even if we disagree with it. I genuinely cannot see quite what he thinks he's going to achieve with this position.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Because, of course, one of the many challenges towards setting up a Palestinian state now is that the territory that is generally considered to be what would become part of Palestine is divided between two completely different groups which hate each other's guts. You've got the West Bank, which is run by Fatah, and you've got the Gaza, which is run by Hamas. Now, when each of those groups took power in each bit, they killed each other's supporters. And so presumably, given the other position that Britain now has, which is that it's signed a joint statement saying that Hamas should leave power in Gaza, we'd be recognizing Fatah in the West Bank. Well, what exactly is that going to do to help deliver peace in Gaza? All of a sudden, things suddenly maybe even get even more existential for Hamas, right? Yeah. Because if Fatah suddenly has the international prestige of being the internationally recognized Palestinian government, then Hamas has even more incentive, potentially, to cling to power. Because once it loses it, it's no longer going to be part of the conversation in the same way ever again.
And this does appear to be again, I'm willing to believe I'm reading this incorrectly, Henry, but it seems to be a bit of a win-win for Hamas.
Yeah, it's look, generally speaking, Hamas is in a much weaker position now than it has been in a very long time. We have just seen several Arab countries call for it to lose power and all the rest of it. So it is a bad position for Hamas. But yes, on the other hand, if Hamas could plausibly draw a line from its attack on October 7th to the recognition of Palestinian statehood by nations such as Britain, it's difficult to see how that would not, in the eyes of Hamas supporters and propagandists, vindicate the attack in some way.
Yeah.
Right? This has always been the challenge with this. It's just that a lot of people you can deplore specific aspects of the conduct of the Israeli state in the way it's prosecuted the Gaza campaign. I personally have said that if Israel is not going to let Gaza have its own government, then it has to assume the responsibility of government in Gaza, and that includes things like making sure that adequate food and supplies are distributed and so on. But it seems absolutely baffling in a region like Israel with a history like that to hand Hamas even the plausible potential of saying that attack on October 3rd, all of those murdered ravers and children and families, that's what finally unlocked international recognition for the state of Palestine.
Yeah. And what's interesting, as we mentioned a couple of times on the programme, you've got the likes of Saudi Arabia and Qatar saying to Hamas, you got to get out of town, boys. The game is over. Down tools and leave, which is a position that sounds more authoritative than Keir Starmer's position. So we've suddenly got Keir Starmer playing sort of second liberal to the likes of Qatar.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ironies, not ironies necessarily, but one of the things that's often not appreciated about this situation by people who are not familiar with the detail of it is that actually none of the Arab states around Israel, however much they formally or really dislike Israel, none of them have really been close allies of the Palestinians.
No.
The Jordanians are wary of them because of there was a threat to the monarchy a couple of decades ago. Egypt, the country which could most easily sort of resolve the humanitarian situation in Gaza by letting Palestinians out of Gaza, refuses to do so. So there has always been this deep wariness. But just think about back to the 1990s, right? We didn't allow Slobodan Milosevic's atrocities to lead to any suggestion that we were going to recognize one of those Serb statelets he set up, right? I don't think there was ever any suggestion that the British government would recognize Krajina, which was the Croatian one. We still to this day formally refuse to allow Srpska, the Serbian bit of Bosnia-Herzegovina, to join with Serbia, despite the fact that a majority of its people would like to do so and are ethnically Serbian. And the atrocities that the Milosevic government were committing, relatively speaking, were vaster. There was a long war for several years, a very, very nasty war that lots of people wanted to stop. But there was never any suggestion that the way to stop that war would be to appease Serbian ultranationalism, right? And so I think it's a very strange shift, if a shift it is, and it's not just sort of an exceptionalism for Israel, that the British government is now prepared to, as you say, at exactly the moment when other countries, including us, weirdly, are trying to turn the vice on Hamas, when there's increasingly widespread recognition of a very reasonable position, I think, on Israel's part, that long-term peace requires Hamas to be out of power, because there is simply no reason for Israel to tolerate having a statelet on its border that is effectively just an armed camp for a group of anti-Semitic mass murderers. But then on the other hand, we're doing this.
Yeah. We will see how this pans out. I think the coming days may be rather interesting, and I'm sure there'll be lots of to and froing between all manner of countries on this current position of the United Kingdom. Let's move to this story, a domestic one. This is referenced the attack, and I think you could reasonably call it an attack, from Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State, Science and Innovation, who suggested that Nigel Farage was a kind of Jimmy Savile apologist because Mr Farage had talked about scrapping the Online Safety Act. It transpires, so we hear, according to the Telegraph, that Number 10 reportedly signed off a coordinated attack to link Farage to Jimmy Savile over his stance on this. I mean, this is a bit disturbing. If they've gone down that route deliberately, this is horrific.
I mean, it's really sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen that sort of internet picture, meme picture, everyone I don't like is Hitler. But that's the level of argument. I mean, I wrote a piece about this morning. It's baffling even on its own terms, right? What Peter Kyle said, if any of your viewers didn't really see it, it's a bit of a word salad, but he says, if Jimmy Savile were alive and operating today, he'd definitely be perpetrating his crimes online. Like, Nigel Farage is on his side. And no element of that makes sense, right? One, Jimmy Savile, of all people, he was a beloved celebrity with unrestricted access to a home for vulnerable children.
Yes.
I don't think he needed the internet particularly. Two, if he was on the internet, grooming people, this act isn't going to stop him doing that. How is it going to stop him doing that? Is it going to stop him lying about his age to sign up to Club Penguin or whatever it is, where you would presumably go if you were a paedophile trying to groom underage people? It's not going to stop him having access to pornographic material that he can send young people, because vast amounts of it aren't age gated because they're run by disreputable, not that I don't say there's a reputable porn site, but even less reputable porn sites haven't bothered with it. So none of it makes sense. But what you have to understand is that essentially there's no real good argument in practice for this act. You can defend the intention obviously protecting children, underage children from pornography, absolutely laudable goal. But the blunt fact is that this act doesn't work. It was very obviously not going to work right from the start. You can get by all its provisions using a VPN in about 30 seconds. And so ministers don't have really good arguments to shut down their critics. So instead, what they're doing is implying that their critics are, either, pro-pornographer or pro-predator or all of this other nonsense, because they've passed a terrible law that they can't defend on its merits.
And it just, look, anyone can have a view that this is not the right. I mean, I know it came in originally under the Conservatives, but, there's nothing misplaced or suggesting that you're an apologist for, pornographers or suicide websites because you happen to think that a bit of government legislation has been badly implemented, which I think is the Farage position. I think his position would be that there are better ways of dealing with this. And I know there's been a lot of conspiracy around this. It's trying to cut off free speech. I mean, that's not the intention of the law, but the manifestation has been supremely sloppy in terms of what it's meant, that people start. And it's a terrible look, isn't it, in your own country, that you go to look at a news article and something pops up saying your country forbids you from looking at this unless you can pass an identity test.
Yeah, which is especially worrying because Labour's proposing to lower the voting age to 16.
Well, indeed,
right?
that compounds the
Whilst at the same time,
of
some of these people won't be able to view news articles until they're 18.
Yeah.
Again, this was all predictable because this is so insanely difficult to actually achieve. Brackets almost impossible. I'm sure North Korea's managed it, but I don't know if its citizens have computers. Because this is so difficult to achieve, the government has simply amped up the hammer with which the state will go after companies that are viewed to have failed it, right? I mean, it's a fine based on global turnover, which for something like, Meta or Google is an absolutely vast sum of money. But that means that they're being wildly, excessively cautious about it. And some of them may even, pull out altogether, because actually there is a requirement in the law that a company might have to turn over elements of its source code to the government or to investigators if it's found to have breached this. Now, the code for something like Grok or an AI, one of the big AI programs, would probably fit on a USB stick and has a value in the hundreds of millions, right? If it's proprietary, cutting edge AI technology, why on earth would you as a company risk that for the sake of what globally is a relatively small market? So there are vast downsides to this legislation, all of which were warned about in advance, and all of which were essentially shut down during the legislative process with, won't somebody please think of the children, right? The Helen Lovejoy argument. And the problem with that is simply that it has shut down rational debate on this law, because what politicians are doing is they're going with their hearts rather than their heads. And they are and they're then demanding to be judged on their motives rather than what they've actually achieved. The most absurd thing, Peter Kyle, the technology secretary, was on television yesterday, and he was just directly pleading with people not to use VPNs to get around the age restrictions on content. Right? But what he said explicitly was, if you don't use a VPN, confirming your identity keeps a child safe. And it's like, how? The internet isn't a turnstile. It's not like if you jump over the Online Safety Act, a kid might follow you through it. Right? The argument didn't make any sense. It's really actually embarrassing to see government ministers conducting themselves in this way.
Yeah, 100%. Just a final one. Taxpayer-funded cost of trade union reps in Angela Rayner's department has jumped 57% in just a year, splashing out $225,000 in extra money. This is employers, of course, who must pay staff facility time, paid time off for union duties, add into public spending. So, I mean, maybe no surprise that a Labour government comes in and they spend a bit more than the previous government did on unionising elements or being perhaps over-generous to union representation.
No, I'm pro-union, right? The private sector. I'm a member of 2 trade unions. I think that one of the frustrating things about powers like this, like facility time, is that there's a case to be made for it, provided, and this has always been the case with a lot of the trade union stuff, and it's why a lot of it was taken away in the 1980s, provided you don't take the mick, right? You know, saying that, okay, a shop steward or something has some duties, those duties are an important service to workers who are a member of a union, maybe they should be able to take a bit of time to do that, absolutely fine. But the idea that it would jump 50% in 1 year, when you have a government that is more supportive of you than previously, then why? Right? This is it. Like, you saying that actually, oh my goodness.
Your people are now in power, you know.
Exactly. Is the argument here that, oh my goodness, you know, Labour have come in and now the union reps are having to work that much harder to protect the workplace rights in Angela Rayner's department because she's cracking down on them like Scrooge at Christmas? It's clearly just people being like, okay, well, now we've got a very permissive boss. We're just going to ramp this up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of thing that undermines the case for what are, if treated sensibly, perfectly acceptable rules allowing trade union to conduct their business.
Listen, on that point, Henry, we hit the clock, as I always seem to say. Thank you for your time, Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Bit of breaking news just come in. Palestine Action, the now proscribed organisation. The co-founder, Huda Amori, has won a bid to bring a High Court challenge over the group's ban as a terror organisation. We will watch with interest how that pans out. In the meantime, my assumption is they might have won a bid to challenge it, but in the interim period, it will remain a banned organisation, and you'll still see people on a weekly basis going out waving flags, wasting lots of police time so they can get arrested in the name of, you know, yay, we're all with the terrorists, because that is essentially the accusation against them. 0344 499 1000. Back with your calls. Loads to come. Barry says, by the way, any possibility we could talk about matters close to home, such as Richmond Council providing immigrants with free gym passes whilst locals have to pay 52 quid a month, or Bolton Council giving 10 veterans with PTSD issue notices to leave their hostel, effectively throwing them out on the street in September. It's another element, isn't it? And you're absolutely right, Barry, and as I think you will probably know, we touch on this stuff all the time, and I'm more than happy to take some extra. There's so much of it; it comes at you like a flurry of these stories. Whether you've got an immigrant guy that's comes into the country with child porn, substantially disturbing child pornography, as if it could be child abuse videos, to give it its correct terminology, plus bestiality videos in there as well. I mean, absolutely disgusting creature that wins the right to stay in the UK. And he doesn't even get a prison sentence for it. It's not like he won the right and they said, well, I'm sorry, you've got to go to Strangeways for 10 years for the filth that you've got on you. None of that. In fact, he walked out of court and gave the thumbs up. And it's that, coupled with what Barry's just mentioned there. I did read this morning as well. Richmond Council saying to him, you've got a free gym pass, but if you're a local, it's 52 quid a month. I mean, what do they think? Have they never read a newspaper, these people? Have they never looked at the room, the temperature of public tolerance and where it is at? I don't think they have. And each time they do something like that, the weirdos over there at the council are giving more and more ammunition to parties that they probably purport to hate, like Nigel Farage. They're actually handing over power to the people that they passionately dislike, and they can't see it. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
His backbenchers basically are demanding recognition of Palestine. His front bench team are not able to deliver that. They get a lot of earache and ear bashing from their backbenchers. He's done this just to tick the box of saying to his political party and to his cabinet and to his deputy prime minister that are all campaigning overtly against Keir Starmer, he's basically had to sort of appease them. And, you know, he hasn't done it once. He's done it before on many other issues. That guy's not a leader. He's literally just following what his party wants.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. One here from Jeff, who says, if the Governor-General of Australia, who represents the King in Australia, can dissolve the governing government, why can't the King dissolve a government that's not doing its job? You know, we often wonder that, but I guess that means the King wading into all sorts of weird matters, political, doesn't it? But wouldn't you love to see it? Let's go to Karen in Bournemouth. Afternoon, Karen, what have you got for us?
Afternoon, Ian. Since the very beginning of Starmer getting into power,
yes,
he's made choices that aided and abetted our enemies. The first thing he did was slow down the arms to Ukraine to help them.
Yep.
Sort of making life a bit awkward. He spent an awful lot of time in China, gave them the Chagos Islands, and has given the permission for the super embassy in central London. Every time things sort of begin to quieten down and somebody sees there might be a way through something, he throws a grenade into the middle of it, and that's what yesterday's speech was. He's also regularly stirring it up. Meanwhile, what's sneaking through is an Islamophobia law. He's screwed free speech, and I'm sure even he's not that ignorant about things. So he's kind of stirring it up to keep us going. Meanwhile, people are coming in at a rate of knots and being treated like royalty. This is like a Trojan horse situation. Because when he does say, you know, stand up to all of this, they'll all come out. Come the time of the next election, then there'll be so much intimidation that there'll be an awful lot of people not going near a voting thing. Or we'll be in such close state of war that he will announce that he can't have an election. Bearing in mind he's already cancelled loads, you know, has tried it out before with the local elections. And this has been his idea all along. This isn't, you know, him just flip-flopping about.
So you think he's almost kind of addicted to chaos in a curious way, throwing those hand grenades into situations?
No, I think he's China and Hamas puppet.
That's
he's on their side. He's not on our side. He's on their side, and he wants that done. And what he'll do is every time, you know, we were screaming madly yesterday about our loss of free speech, so he comes in with this thing on Israel.
Yeah. So he's not going to get your vote. Can I safely say that, Karen?
I think so, yeah.
You've been great. Thank you, Karen in Bournemouth. Let's nip over to Newcastle. Ian is here. Ian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Ian. Are you all right?
Yeah, good, thank you. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are this, that when somebody tells you who or what they are, you should believe them. This man is clearly an anti-Semite. What you have to bear in mind, Ian, is this is the same man who tried to get Jeremy Corbyn into number 10.
Yeah.
They are still the only party that have ever been looked at from an anti-Semitism point of view, from a racist point of view. This man has clearly now taken over Corbyn's mantle, and I firmly believe that this man is now the head of the snake of the anti-Semites.
So even though, because I mean, it's very easy, and I totally get why you draw that conclusion, because you know, if it looks like a duck and all that business, but then he's also employed sort of Blairite advisors around him, and Jeremy Corbyn hates him. So where does that leave your logic, and I would share your logic as well, where does that leave that? Because that's always the answer that comes back. Well, why would he employ those people around him?
Well, it's funny that you should mention Tony Blair, because obviously if you want to get onto the migration topic, who was the man who opened the borders in the first place? A certain Anthony Blair, who, don't forget, he actually came into the triumphant sounds of that song, do you remember it? Things Can Only Get Better. Well,
Bit of D-Ream.
The only people who've had a benefit of Things Can Only Get Better seem to me all these migrants and people who come here illegally. And he still is actually suggesting that these people are irregular migration, which is absolutely... I'm done for.
Well, I mean, the Blair thing is, this doesn't get enough airtime, really, because, you know, obviously Blair was, you know, as part of the EU, it was an EU thing. However, he didn't have to, he could have limited the number of people that were coming in. He had the absolute legal right to limit it. Lots of people in his cabinet said, no, I think even Gordon Brown said, you don't have to allow this amount of people to come in. And he said, no, let's go the whole hog. Let's do everything. There were other countries in Europe that were not allowing that amount of other Europeans to come into their country. And Blair said, no, we're open the gates. Everything's going to be tickety-boo. And they reckon, but maybe about 12,000 people will turn up. 12,000. I think in the event, 2.5 million did, or something crazy like that.
Well, absolutely. The thing is, you know, I'm a great believer. You know the old saying, sort of, lies, the statistics, the more damn lies, etc.
Yeah.
We also live by the remit these days, by facts, and facts speak volumes. And the fact is that this Labour Party, who I'm ashamed to say, as a British Jewish person, I always used to vote for, because obviously I thought they had the interests of people like myself at heart, but I firmly believe that they don't anymore, and Howard Free is over now for me to ever vote for this Labour Party ever again. And I just think he's surrounded himself by like-minded. They haven't got a singular thought amongst all of them. They're almost like ants. You know, like how ants are often sort of said, like hive mentality. Yeah. All these people have a hive mentality. And unfortunately for Jewish people, the hive mentality is, and I'm going to quote David Baddiel here, he actually said, not so long ago, Jews don't matter. And I think it spoke volumes yesterday. In this country, I'm afraid to say, and I'm sorry to say, that Jewish people simply do not matter.
There it is. Ian, thank you very much indeed. Ian in Newcastle. Yeah, that was his book, Jews Don't Count, I think it was called, his book, on the issue of racism and how Jews have managed to sort of find themselves in this sort of lone position of not being included in the racist debate. Now, we don't, you know, that's a whole separate thing. It's the kind of Diane Abbott school of racism. Now, that group doesn't really count. Just this one group does. That's worse than all the other racism. And in fact, there's many powerful, fairly stable, solid even, intellectual arguments as to why, in fact, it's much worse. And it's much worse because it's not recognised. And that therefore, by definition, makes it much worse. It's horrendous. And, you know, we know that it grew phenomenally and in an unfettered manner when Jeremy Corbyn was in power. And I'm not necessarily pointing at him personally, although he had his own battles with it, of course, with various Facebook posts and goodness knows what else. But it was there. And I remember taking phone calls at the time on that from people going, why are you defending the Jews? They're doing all right. They're doing all right. So a whole collective of everybody doing all right. I mean, that's just that very stereotype. It's, you know, it's like saying black people all look the same. You know, it's in the same ballpark of offensive. It's not even mumbo jumbo. That makes it sound like comedic. It's just horrifically, a horrific generalisation of an entire people. But that's kind of what Jews have put up with and continue to do so. But it's lost for many people who, for some reason, never quite understood it. It's a similar mentality. I know I've said this before. You know, whereas only, you know, a corduroy-clad, bearded university left-wing lecturer can somehow mount a serious argument as to why Stalin was quite a nice bloke. And it's sort of fairly similar to that for some reason the good people of the Middle East, or the regimes of the Middle East, are ultimately they're the good guys, Iran and what's happening with in Gaza with Hamas and God knows how many other pockets and administrations that share similar lethal ideologies. For some reason, they're the good people. We're the bad people. They're the good guys. Just like, where did you get that from? How did you construct that logic? It's just extraordinary. But that's kind of where we're at. That's exactly where we're at. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, 25 to 3. Voice of Doom back in around about 15 minutes. It's day 6, I think I'm right. So day 6. Will it go today? And also this story, the BBC facing a fresh viewer exodus as over 55s flock to YouTube instead of traditional TV. YouTube has overtaken ITV to become Britain's second most watched service, now closing in on the BBC's top spot. Ofcom says even older viewers are ditching the licence fee, watching nearly double the YouTube content they did last year. Let's speak with James Warrington, media and telecoms editor at The Telegraph. James, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian.
In what sort of form are people watching YouTube? Because I saw this headline, I thought it's interesting because we are broadcasting now on YouTube, and then, you know, what we're doing right now is then cut up into smaller pieces and put out onto YouTube. That's where the bigger audience is served. Bite-sized chunks as distinct from perhaps people sitting down and watching a film or an entire documentary series. Is it that?
Well, there's a bit of both, actually. So this data comes from Ofcom, and it's looking at our viewing habits across the country, how we consume media. What's really interesting about it is it's only measuring viewing on TV sets. So these numbers that we look at, as you say, YouTube is now 14% viewing time. It's overtaken the ITV. It's almost caught up with the BBC now. But these are people who are switching on their telly, their traditional TV, and going straight to the YouTube app. And what that says, really, I mean, for ages, people have been consuming bite-sized chunks, like you say, on the app or on their laptop. But there's now a direct threat with traditional broadcasters because people are turning to YouTube for almost TV-style programming.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because YouTube have had dalliances into sort of some fairly major stuff, some sporting events. They've covered football, they've covered tennis, etc. They don't seem to. I mean, it seems to be a little ad hoc in that respect. Is this an area? Do you sense that certainly YouTube will pursue with a little more vigour going forward, so they become the sort of, you know, when we talk about football rights, it's sort of Sky versus ITV versus BBC, a bit of Amazon thrown in. Do you think YouTube will more seriously look at those seismic events as a way of almost sealing their ongoing success?
It's definitely a possibility, and we're seeing increasingly, as I say, YouTube kind of moving into that traditional broadcasting space, I think it's worth remembering that when it comes to things like sports rights that the likes of Sky have held for a long time, these are big, expensive rights packages that cost a lot of money. And obviously, YouTube is not short of money. It's owned by Google, but it's a big investment to make. And it also comes with a side of regulation of traditional broadcasting that maybe moves away from the user-generated content that YouTube is used to. So I think what's perhaps even more interesting is what we're seeing the broadcasters do, which is make programming specifically for YouTube. So rather than YouTube making their own programming, what we're seeing is the likes of Channel 4, ITV, think, well, look, audiences are now on YouTube. They're not tuning into us on traditional terrestrial TV. So we're going to target them where they are. And that might mean different kinds of programming. It might mean putting full-length episodes onto YouTube. But either way, these traditional broadcasters are having to adapt.
Yeah. I remember somebody predicting this years ago and saying to me, they didn't specifically mention YouTube, but when I started in this industry, somebody said there won't really be channels in the same way. It'll be, a very, very different way that we digest entertainment. And, kids watch things in one way, and that perhaps will have an effect going forward over the coming generations. And but as you rightly say, even adults as well, you look down at the kind of choice. And I suppose that's maybe a double-edged sword sometimes. How often have we all started one of those, supposed great new Netflix crime dramas, only to discover it's absolute tosh after about 20 minutes, but you spent about 2 hours searching for the right one. That usually seems to be done on recommendations. But YouTube is, again, there's a plethora of stuff. If you sit, I can look at our feed right now. I'm looking at your wonderful face there, James, and alongside all of that, it's serving me up similar or associated content of radio and media type talk programs, some comedians in there based probably on my history of what I've looked at in the past, etc. But there's so much material there that you sometimes wonder, is this again, when Madge and Bob sit down of an evening on their sofa, are they just flicking through the incredible choice, or are they saying, nope, there's a great new documentary or new drama I want to watch on YouTube?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, and that is where traditional broadcasters can set themselves apart, and it's through that question of quality. The barriers to entry for YouTube are very low. Almost anyone can get a camera and start filming and make something. What broadcasters and streaming services both have is those high-quality, big-budget shows that maybe you can't get on YouTube. And another interesting thing in the figures there is that while, yes, we're watching more YouTube, we're watching more Netflix, but the biggest shows are still on traditional TV. So last year, half of the top 10 most watched TV shows in the UK were on either the BBC, ITV or Channel 4. It's things like the Gavin and Stacey finale at Christmas. It might be a football tournament like the Euros, something like that. But in terms of people sitting down to watch big events that draw the nation together, that's what broadcasters still have that YouTube hasn't achieved.
And I would take a guess, James, that going forward, this is the direction of travel, right? I mean, it's not going to reverse this trend.
No, absolutely. So as we noted, BBC is still ahead there on 19% of viewing, but it looks as if that gap will just narrow over the years to come. The doors have opened, the floodgates have opened, I suppose. So it's a question now of how the broadcasters adapt to that and how they make sure that fine, people might be on YouTube, but when they're on YouTube, what they're watching is broadcaster content rather than user-generated content by an influencer, for example.
Indeed. James, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. James Warrington is the telecoms and media editor over there at The Telegraph. It is fascinating how this wheels out now. So my kids don't understand TV channels. They've got no concept of BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, Channel 4. Literally no understanding of that. Okay, one of them's 6 or 7 in 2 days, but and the other one's 11. Now, the 11-year-old, if you are left into his own devices, would love to be. No, you have to curtail YouTube. YouTube, by the way, isn't quite so bad in terms of content as perhaps its reputation has with some parents. But you've got to be diligent at what your kid is looking at. and we know, online safety and all that kind of business. But generally speaking, if you're looking up kind of, fun stuff, music stuff, you're kind of all right, but you've still got to be on it. Now, YouTube, many of you will not know this, there's a thing called YouTube Kids, which is a whole other YouTube channel. And that's great. The downside of YouTube Kids is that there's, 20 million programs on there, or whatever it is. So this morning, my little boy was watching something on YouTube Kids, and I went into the bathroom. He was sitting in the bedroom looking at this. Came out, he's watching something else. 2 seconds later, something else, because he's flick, 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 flick. He's going through it at a rapid rate of knots. He's not settling on any one thing. Oh, he's watching a funny cartoon. Oh, the joke's done. It's not funny for the next 2 seconds. I'll get on to something else. I think that bit is, I don't know whether that's disturbing, whether it's a crying shame, or whether it's just the inevitable direction of traffic on this stuff. User-generated content is kind of interesting. There are some people making serious money out of YouTube. If you stumble across something, and I was just looking at one here. Now, if you have an account that, for example, generates a couple of 100,000 views on one of your videos, but you've got 10 of those up there. So you've got 10. So collectively, you've got 2 million viewers. You've now got serious viewers from your idea. Your idea might be pants, it might be unbelievable, whatever it happens to be. It could be stuff where you've actually kind of hoovered up other people's material and cobbled it together and somehow managed to circumnavigate copyright, but you've done it. If you do that, then amazing. You've got as many viewers as a daytime TV show and some primetime TV shows. So you can do quite well out of it. I suppose my area of interest here, and I said I don't watch loads of TV. I sat in the kitchen last night doing some work, watching Kevin O'Sullivan, and I was on my laptop and listening to and watching Kev. It was brilliant. But I don't sit down on the sofa and go, oh, right, 7:30 Coronation Street, 8 o'clock, I'm going to watch, Panorama or whatever it is, then I'll flick back and watch 24 Hours in Police Custody. I'll tend to watch the stuff I want to watch on the app of whatever channel it might be. I'll just sort of watch it later on, catch up, etc. So all of that, everything's changed. You don't miss anything now. You don't miss anything. There's no such thing as missing a programme, because you just go home and watch it. Brad says, I'm 71, I've been watching YouTube for years. I'm a subscriber, so 0 advert, and it's the best few quid that I spend each month. The biased BBC is in its death throes, says Brad in Cambridge. Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of variety, you'd never get bored. But I suppose YouTube is still slightly different to Netflix. Netflix is a set of programmes, comedy, drama, film, whatever it happens to be, and you can settle in that respect, whereas YouTube will have some of that on it, but it will have mostly, unless you're watching a programme like this. And we do, the way it works here, I don't think I'm betraying or letting anyone into a great secret. We'll broadcast a programme, 4,000 or 5,000 people will watch it. The boys and girls in the creative departments then cut all the programmes up into bite-sized chunks and little bits and pieces, and then that goes off into the ether. So you end up with, you can do an interview with somebody that has 2,000 people watching you live, but when that interview is cut up separately, 200,000-300,000 people could watch that interview, and then a couple of 100,000 the next one. So that's how a media organisation deals with it, and they collate their numbers in that respect. Interesting times. Where is your choice? Well, I hope it's YouTube right now, because that's where we're broadcasting live. Rachel is in Oxford. Rachel, back to that issue of Keir Starmer and his incredible announcement yesterday on Palestine. What do you make of it?
Oh, it makes me ashamed to be British. I only have one Jewish friend, and when I said to her, "You think you're my only Jewish friend?" she said, "I'm not surprised. There's only 300,000 of us in the country."
Yes.
Which kind of. But what I was thinking about was the way that Benjamin Netanyahu said, "If it's today on our doorstep, it'll be tomorrow on yours." As I understand it, I already read this, that Israel shares a lot of intelligence with us about radical Islam.
Yep.
Why would they continue to do that now?
Correct.
If we've betrayed them,
yep.
Well, why are we going to help you? You didn't want to help us, so.
It's quite interesting, given the nature of the Middle East as well, and the only democratic nation in the Middle East is Israel. I mean, that in itself, regardless of anything else, is, you know, a point that you might wish as a Prime Minister to really hold at the top of the pile of reasons to not go down this route?
But he's not for democracy. He knows he doesn't have a mandate, but he's still riding roughshod over the country. But I just don't understand this. This is why would Benjamin Netanyahu, who's not the nicest man on the planet, let's face it, why is he going to say, oh, do you know what? You've decided to, recognise Palestine, ignore us, but we're still going to give you all the information you need. I mean, Europe won't do it, and we only just stopped trading with them. We just left their club. We didn't sort of throw them under the Islamist bus. I don't get it.
No, and you're not alone, Rachel. We're all scratching our heads on this one. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. Voice of Doom, Day 6 on its way in a couple of moments. More comment from you. Lines are open. This is Talk.
I think one of the difficulties is that engagement as it goes on now tends to be with so-called community leaders. And I'm not quite sure how community leaders get appointed or elected or emerge. Perhaps they just emerge in the form of the old leaders of the Tory party in the 60s. I don't know. But they seem to have a focus on things that actually don't really matter all that much to people who are losing their phones and losing their cars and losing things from their home when they're burgled.
Yeah, exactly right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just gone 10 to 3. Sam says, what you were talking about with your son flicking through YouTube clips of longer programmes, this is actually rife in society at the moment, is what's causing in many adults as well as kids, teenagers, is the creation of a significantly smaller attention span. Yeah, they often talk about, youngsters can't watch films because the idea of investing in anything over about 90 seconds is troubling, let alone 2.5 hours. Sam says TikTok is popular because the length of the small clips. Many kids and useful idiot adults wise only trust the news from social media videos like TikTok. I mean, that is always the big old danger of why are you not I say this every day, why are you not reporting this? And then somebody sends a video of somebody standing there saying something. You think, well, we don't even know if it's true, or sometimes it's definitely not true. Hence the reason why we're not reporting it. That's just the nature of, if you give every single person on planet Earth the microphone, which is what social media does, you are going to inevitably end up with a jungle, a cacophony of material, and some of it will be absolutely gold and tip-top the best. But you've got to wade through an awful lot of nonsense to get there. Right, day 6 of The Voice of Doom. This is, for the uninitiated, the mystery voice with a political angle. It's always a politician you're looking for, or someone associated with politics, past or present. I think we can say past on this one. Here's the question: who is this?
I certainly have things to say.
It's not Ian Duncan Smith, Jacob Rees-Mogg or any of that lot. Go back a little further than that. In fact, much further. Here it is again.
I certainly have things to say.
87222 if you want to have a guess at that. 87222. Hopefully we can tell you after 3 o'clock who it is, but only if we get a right answer. If not, it rolls over to... In fact, I'm not here till next Tuesday after today. Off tomorrow. I think Jonathan Gullis is here tomorrow and Friday, and then I'm back on Tuesday. Here's the voice again.
I certainly have things to say.
Who's that then? 87222. Back on the phones with you. Andrew is in Hertfordshire. Always a sane voice on international issues. Andrew, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I didn't sign off your holiday for the next couple of days, so
Sorry about
I'm
that.
not sure you can take them.
Okay,
no,
yeah. There should have been an email that came out last week. I don't know what happened to it.
I apologise unreservedly to the Jewish nation and to the Jewish people within this country. We have let them down. We should hang our heads in shame. This is more about the power of Jeremy Corbyn within the Labour Party, more about the power that he exerts on those 220 MPs. Hamas win out of this. Iran wins out of this. Jewish people lose out of this. All Starmer, if he was a leader, had to say was, there will be no Palestinian state recognition until the hostages are released. Full stop, capital sentence, new statement.
Yeah.
That's all he had to do. And the bit that I'm so annoyed about, I care about women and children in this country who are being attacked by people, illegal immigrants. That's his priority. And all this stuff is just a cloud to avoid dealing with that. And he has let us down. He's let the country down. He's let Jewish people down. But more than anything, Keir Starmer's let himself down.
The problem is, and again, you see this on, I'm going to say it again, social media. There are some horrendous images coming out of Gaza, of course, and nobody wants to see that. It's incredibly disturbing, and I'm not suggesting for 1 second that Israel have always covered themselves in glory or got it right. I don't think Netanyahu is a good man or any of that stuff. So I get all of that. Nobody wants to see any of that. If you can put a stop to it in any shape or form, that would be amazing. In the same way that any war, and this doesn't justify anything, any war has pictures of horror in it, and that's what fundamentally is happening here. There isn't just a war that Israel is fighting against terrorist organisations. There's a war we're all fighting, right? We're all in this. And I keep quoting that I've been watching this 7/7 documentary, and it goes back to the ideology and the radicalisation of these young men born in this country, not really Brits, but born in this country, and that's what Israel and the rest of us are up against with Hamas, right? I mean, we are dealing with Al-Qaeda-like characters. I mean, this is who they are.
But the thing is in life is people start to self-diagnose and they say, right, OK, I think I've got this problem. They do a psychology evening class. If they get to the part in the book where it thinks it's about them, and then they never go back. If you want to solve anything, the most important person in anybody's life is themselves. If you look after yourself, you can look after other people. The most important thing for a Prime Minister to do is to focus on the country and to put that right.
Yeah.
After that, we can look after other people. What's happening in Gaza is happening in Gaza. That's not important. What's happening in this country, to the people of this country, is the focus of the Prime Minister. After that, we can look after people. And I'd suggest Sudan is a better place to put our energy.
I make you bang on, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. And Gaza and Israel and what is happening is not, this is, you can't just view it in the isolation of where we're at right now. I'm not going to defend the indefensible. I'm certainly not going to, if stories of, again, you hear it I'm watching videos that people are posting all the time now saying there's loads of aid here. Look, it's all here. It's Hamas that are stopping it, or it's this group that are stopping it, or that group. I don't see those horrendous images of people in Yemen or elsewhere, other parts of the world. I only see this sort of disproportionate focus on what Israel are doing. And if they're doing bad stuff, call it out and jail the people responsible. But the wider story is the one you have to look at. Who we're doing business with, what kind of world we want to live in, where an area or a region can be safe, what previous agreements literally said rather than what people interpret them as saying nearly 100 years later. You take the point, and you won't get to any sort of decent truth unless you look at that. Voice of Doom, will we get a right answer? Here's the voice.
I certainly have things to say.
87222 if you think you know. News is next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is the Afternoon Empire. Yes, good afternoon. Welcome back. What have we got on the agenda? Well, loads, to be honest. Israel accusing Keir Starmer of giving in to terrorism and rewarding Hamas. This is over his threat to recognise Palestine unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and allows UN aid into Gaza. There is so much wrong with this. However, in the spirit of fairness, we are trying to get to the bottom of it and asking the question, what is the logic behind Keir Starmer's Palestine pledge? We can't find it. No one we've spoken to can find it either. Maybe you can supply the missing piece of the jigsaw, and our lines are open. As you've been hearing, knife crime in London has nearly doubled under Sadiq Khan, with the West End now the major hotspot, while just 5% of robberies were solved last year. Can they ever get this right? And how does Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor and essentially the police and crime commissioner of the capital city, how does he get a free pass in all of this? Norman Brennan joins us shortly. And the private parking industry, I always smile at these stories, is being urged to come clean about how often dodgy tickets actually get overturned, with appeals bodies accused of hiding behind outdated or missing data, leaving drivers in the dark and undermining trust in the system. What a mafia-type racket this area is. We'll have more on that. And if you've been collared by the parking police, you know exactly how it feels. It's not so much getting collared, it's the appeal thing. You try to appeal and all you are appealing is basic honesty and truth. This is what happened. No, I wasn't there at that time. I was only there for this time. You can't possibly be trying to ask for 100 quid, which is a deal to some people that breaks the budget for the month in the family house. In some places, it's just unaffordable. What do you do in those situations? But if you've been there, where you've absolutely found it impenetrable to try and get any kind of logic or response or justice from the parking bods, just tell us about that. 0344 499 1000. Before we go into our next story, let's just do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? This is the political mystery voice. This is the voice we've been playing you.
I certainly have things to say.
It's day 6 of that. Have we got a winner? These are some of the guesses. Michael Foot. No. Cecil Parkinson. It is not. Robert Carr. Yasser Arafat. He, of course, is the former PLO leader. No. Nicholas Budgen, David Crouch, John Gummer, Nigel Lawson, Jim Murphy. No. None of those are correct. We haven't got the right answer. It rolls over to next Tuesday, which is when I'm back here for day 7. Good luck. Now, knife crime offences in London have nearly doubled under Sadiq Khan. 86% rise in the last decade. In any other world, of any other bad area of society, you'd like to think, I don't know, accidents in the workplace, for example, a TV falling off the wall and hitting you on the head, that kind of health and safety. All of that stuff is from 10 years ago, it's always getting better. They find new and innovative ways to make everything safer so that people don't cut themselves or, chop off their own foot while cutting bread or something if you work in Bokits, wherever. But knife crime, no. I mean, this, you might think by now, wow, 2025? Surely not. Yeah, it's got worse. 86% rise in the last 10 years. The West End is now a growing hotspot, accounting for almost 15% of all knife crimes across the capital. 5% of robberies, 0.6% of theft from a person, that's like your mobile phone or your bag, was solved last year. This is the Policy Exchange report calling for zero tolerance policing and a return to tougher stop and search tactics. Let's speak with Norman Brennan, former police officer, over 30 years in the job. He's been a victim of knife crime and he's certainly worked in this field for a long time. He's a media commentator on very much gun and knife crime and the effects of homicide. Norman, look, we're here again, Norman. You and I first spoke about this about 23 years ago, I think, and here we are in 2025 thinking by now it would have got better, and it's got worse.
Well, I've been campaigning on knife crime, Ian, for over 30 years. 15 years when I was a serving police officer. As I've said to you many times, I saw what was coming. I saw what was coming as a serving police officer, and we're the ones that know what's going on the streets. I don't really know what more to say. That nobody seems to get a grip on it. There's so much that needs to be done. There is so much that can be done, but nobody ever does anything. And even this government, when they come into power, what was their first promise? We're going to cut knife crime by half in 10 years. Well, no government is able to cut it by 5%, let alone 50% in the last 35 years. So what is it that spectacularly she's going to do any different from anyone else? And not only that, Ian, we haven't got the police officers. The public rarely see a police officer on the street for the everyday routine crimes, shoplifting, theft of their vehicle, theft of their bike, burglary, robbery. And only 3 weeks ago in Knightsbridge, a very young man, 24 years of age from Hampshire, was stabbed to death in Kensington for his Rolex watch. Life has become so cheap and nobody seems to be able to find a solution. Well, I've been suggesting them for 35 years. I might have been speaking to a brick wall.
Yeah. What is the solution, Norman? I mean, I think I've got some ideas, but if you had to encapsulate that into a few sentences, what needs to be done that could, I mean, you're never going to put a stop to all criminality, but dramatically reduce what's going on?
Well, when I went to 10 Downing Street in full uniform as a serving officer on the 13th of December 2004 with black and white families from London who have been bereaved by knife crime, what we suggested was this: 5 years mandatory prison sentencing for anybody that carries a knife on the streets without lawful authority or reasonable excuse. What a massive impact that would have. 3 years if you're a juvenile. Mass stop and search. If we actually went out and people knew that there was a likelihood they would be stopped and they would face punitive punishments like I just suggested, I promise you, Ian, within a year it would dramatically reduce. Also, we need personal and parental responsibility. Nobody seems to take responsibility for their children carrying knives on the streets and then wondering why some of them don't come home. Then, of course, we look at mentors and we do a national education programme. What the public want is just one promise to be made and kept that is effective. I don't see any promises made. All I ever see, and as I'm sure you see, is smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, and we seem to be in that same place where things like stop and search, which I think most logical-minded people will say you need a mass, and you just said it, Norman, a mass acceleration of that. You know, you could have certain days, and you wouldn't necessarily tell the criminal fraternity what days they will be, but you can get, you know, the chief can sign it off so there's a certain order where you will be out there, and absolutely, you know, you see those characters on the street, you are going to go for it as the police. But that gets a lot of resistance. Oddly, across parties as well. Even, you know, the Conservatives will now say in power, in opposition, yeah, we need more stop and search, but they didn't really do much about it. In fact, it reduced under Theresa May, for goodness sake.
Yeah, Ian, I don't know what it is within policing and governments. They seem to be frightened of certain sections of the community that always complain if they're stopped and searched. Yeah. Well, I was in a robbery squad for 6 years. I didn't go out and stop the colour of the skin. I looked at the statistics, the dynamics, who was committing the crime, and my team and I went out, and that's who we directed our stop and search on. Now, all of these different groups that keep on saying, well, we're sick and tired of being stopped and searched. Well, Ian, I've sat down with dozens, if not hundreds, of families, young mothers and fathers, that have just planned a funeral rather than a bright future for their child, and they're sick and tired of their children being murdered, their communities being held to ransom, and people feeling that they cannot walk the streets in safety. Now, the community leaders and those certainly within the black community in London, it's about time they looked within, looked in the mirror, and actually started taking responsibility for issues and problems that they are partly responsible for and that they can find the solutions for, rather than blaming the police and anybody else. And they never seem to, Ian, come up with an alternative solution to stop and search. All they do is damn it. And the thing is, it's their own communities, Ian, that are losing lives, being maimed and being seriously injured and living in fear.
And in addition to that, we also have this other statistic in this research as well, in this report from the Policy Exchange, that says the amount of cases that are solved is at record lows as well. 5% of robberies, 0.6% of theft from person cases. So these are the characters that go around on bikes and nick your phone or your bag and stuff like that. Very hard to catch them. Dwindling police numbers doesn't clearly help, but you might think the amount of CCTV that's out there now would help. What do you put this down to, Norman? Because these, again, are very damning figures if we're not solving crime even when we see it.
I'll tell you what I put it down to, Ian. Neglect. I would hold certain government ministers and home secretaries to account for malfeasance. That is when you're in a public office, you fail to carry out your duty effectively. Now, let me cut through all of this nonsense, Ian. I'm getting old now. I've been campaigning for 35 years. I've said the same thing 35 years ago. Let me tell you how serious it really is. And this should shock people, but it probably doesn't. We are in anarchy. Gun crime, knife crime, violent crime, shoplifting, antisocial behaviour, theft of Rolex watches, 88,000 mobile phones stolen on the streets of London, no-go areas, people frightened to travel to London, people wanting to get out of London. And it's not just London. Knife crime is an epidemic nationally. It's a cancer. And Ian, I'll leave you with this thought. We are brilliant at finding penicillin and cures for illnesses. However, we don't seem to be able to have the ability to invest in our future and find a cure for knife crime that blights society and is a national epidemic and an embarrassment. And it's seen throughout the world that Britain has a serious problem that it just can't tackle and cure.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. We can't tackle and cure it. Norman, always passionate stuff, and great to see you again, looking well. Norman Brennan, former cop, but a very frustrated former cop, did over 30 years. He was the victim of a knife attack as well. I mean, an absolutely horrific knife attack, only just about pulled through, but he's dealt with it as a police officer. He's campaigned for it, even when he was in the job as a police officer, and subsequently since leaving that work as a commentator on gun and knife crimes and the effect of homicides. And you just wouldn't think that it would. And I'd never thought until I said it out loud a second ago, where you look at things that improve in life, you might think this area would improve, if for no other reason than the amount of intelligence we have in other areas, like CCTV, where you really can't go anywhere without being captured either by the store, the street, the lamppost, a dash cam, a doorbell cam, you name it. Your journey is marked from the minute you leave your house in the morning. You'd think all of this stuff would be sorted, but I guess there's a certain personnel issue. You can have all the CCTV in the world if you've got nobody to look at it and spend hours doing it. And then if those crimes proliferate so much that you're dealing with thousands, you just couldn't simply go through all of that. It would take, you watch those 24-hour in police custody stories, it can take weeks just to begin to trace the journey of one person. How could they possibly do that? I mean, that's a robbery thing, but knife crime, and people are dying on this, and Sadiq Khan is the man precise. I can't think of any other administration that would keep getting elected back into office on the basis of that. And I'll say it for the umpteenth time. This is a man that will talk a lot about the two things he likes talking about. One is diversity, and the other are ULEZ cameras, of how he's stopping people dying because of his cameras. Spoiler alert, he's not. However, get him to talk about and get animated about knife crime. Have you ever heard Sadiq Khan angry about kids dying, rather than a kind of very placid, vacuous platitude that was written by some advisor and it's wheeled out in front of the cameras? This is unacceptable. I mean, you don't really see him at all, but if you do see him, that's the kind of thing you get. You don't get anger or determination. You don't get that, when the, what was his name? Bill Braddon, was it? The New York senior cop. The sort of broken windows policy, the guy that, he was animated. This guy was going to stop the scum that was causing horrendous havoc. And it's a small group, relatively, that's responsible for a huge percentage of criminality. Get angry, Mr. Khan. Get annoyed, Sadiq. Be animated about children dying on your watch. You are literally the man in charge. You're both the mayor of the capital city and you're also the chief of police, essentially, of the capital city. It's down to you. Make it happen. Let's go back to your calls on that issue of Keir Starmer and his comments yesterday. Grace is down in London. What do you make of this, Grace? Good afternoon.
Hi, yeah. I mean, I'm generally a Labour voter, so I'm not instinctively hateful of Starmer in the way that I know some people are, but I really feel very cynical about this. I don't understand how it helps the people who are starving to recognise statehood. I'm concerned about the people who are starving, although it's obviously difficult to know exactly what's going on the ground, but it is very concerning, and yet I don't see how this helps. And if Starmer really cared about human beings who are facing famine, and I personally think that we very very much should do, he wouldn't have cut overseas aid. He wouldn't be ignoring the fact that some of the poorest countries in the world are having to pay more out in debt than they get in aid. He wouldn't be, disregarding the bigger humanitarian crisis, which is in Sudan. It's really exciting that we can help some people in our world who are really suffering. Trying to get help into Gaza seems like a very difficult task right now, but there are people who we could really be making a difference for. It's amazing how pound for pound you can make a real impact for the world's most disadvantaged people, far more than you can make an impact when you spend the same amount of money here. But he's chosen to cut aid, and yet he's claiming to care about people who are starving. I don't buy it. I don't believe him.
What do you think, by his logic then, what do you think Starmer thinks he's achieving by this?
Well, he's trying to keep on side people who are drifting off to, join Corbyn's party or what have you, or to make out on the world stage that he's somehow doing something. But it just, to me, doesn't really seem logical in humanitarian terms. If your primary concern is to reduce the suffering of human beings, it doesn't seem to me that this particularly does that, or that he particularly wants to do that. And it feels frustrating. I just think, we could actually be helping some of the people in our world, but he's instead trying to just make a statement in the midst of a very intractable conflict, where I don't think it actually is going to do any good.
I sense you are right. And you touched on something I thought was rather interesting. And thank you for your call, Grace, by the way. But the sort of international thing, which seems to be his comfort zone, being an internationalist and parading and getting the headlines on that level, it is something he quite likes. Spectacular. I mean, he doesn't even need me to say this. It's spectacularly missing out and criminally letting down his own people. It's all very well notching up your air miles, Keir, but you've got a country to run here. You've got some very concerned people. Some are skint, some are worried, some are scared, some are bothered. There's a big old list of things that are, on the agenda to sort out domestically. Maybe hang around and sort it out, apply some logic. And if, as Grace said there, if that's what he's doing, is trying to sort of hoover up that kind of Corbyn vote. I mean, he talked about an island of strangers when talking about immigration. Didn't do anything about it, by the way, which is sort of a nod to, that's a bit of a new line from Keir Starmer, echoing a little bit of Enoch Powell. Goodness me. Get the Reform voters back to Labour. Well, that's not going to work. If this is his idea of getting some Corbyn voters back to Starmer, that's not going to work either. You lost the dressing room the minute you walked into number 10, mate. Have a philosophy, have a backbone, have an idea, have a framework, have a template, have just a direction of travel, a philosophy that you absolutely stand by, because at the moment we haven't got a flipping clue what you stand for. And you're the Prime Minister. 0344 499 1000.
You're absolutely right, Peter. It's an absolute disgrace. We've had the work. We thought it was bad enough when police officers were not investigating these things, when alleged community leaders could stop things, and we were told that not investigating grooming gangs was some kind of social cohesion. And now it's stepped into even more worse ground, that 3 officers have been arrested, retired officers. And I agree with you, and I agree with Professor Jay, who did the report into Rotherham in 2014.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 23 minutes after 3 o'clock. Mark says stop and search is the only way to tackle knife crime. There needs to be more police on the streets and they need to be armed and able to stop as many people as they want. I can tell you with some level of authority here that the average copper wants to do that. They are scared to do that a little because there's no support from above, really. It's like you're given this task and then you're accused of all manner of horrendous things, even though you're filmed, but your own body armour is filming, and everyone else is filming, and the friends of perpetrators are all filming. So you're usually cut. But it only takes a complaint to tarnish your career and put you off work for about 6 months while you're investigated because you apparently spoke to somebody unkindly while trying to wrestle a knife from them. So there is, but the average copper wants to do that. They want to go out, they want to catch the bad guy. You speak to a police officer, why did you get into policing? I wanted to catch bad people. I wanted to take them off the street and, make the world a nicer place that we can all enjoy when we go shopping. So there's an issue not with the individual copper, but with above. And that above goes to the Home Office, of course, Theresa May, who, people often consider, because she was a bit schoolmistressy, considered her to be, there's a right-wing Tory Home Secretary, longest-serving Home Secretary, I think I'm right in saying, in history. And she cut back on stop and search. She reduced stop and search. Well, if she can do it, God knows what Yvette Cooper is thinking. Michael's in Birmingham. Back to the big issues of the day. Michael, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Yeah, hi, Ian.
Hi.
Sorry, it's going to be a slightly gloomy call.
It's all right.
I just give up because I think we have to look at the migration crisis from a different angle.
Mm-hmm.
From our point of view, or people like my point of view, it's a disaster. But for Starmer and his cronies, it's all going swimmingly according to plan.
Yeah.
They've got the supply chain to get people across the channel, and I'm very suspicious about NGOs and charities into that.
Sure.
They've got 4-star hotels welcoming people with all sorts of gifts. They've got their delivery jobs. They've got priorities into housing, and they've got their passports, which they'll be fast-tracked. The recognition of Palestine as a state will have yet more migrants coming. Believe me, that's another 1 million or 2 million coming.
Yep.
And by the next election, it's gone. It's gone. It'll be too late. The population will have been replaced, and Reform cannot win. The only thing we can do is either two things. One is, like me, plan to leave, and I doubt I ever will, because I seriously think this is a dangerous country to live in these days. Really, I do.
Mm-hmm.
And or also, Reform have gone MIA. They need to be looking a bit like the anti-Brexit brigade were doing. And, even though they're not going to elect for 4 years, get some lawfare going. Get some of this blocked in courts. OK, I know judges are activists, but at least try something. Get Elon Musk's millions back in and see what we can do to challenge some of these decisions. Because apart from that, Ian, it's gone. I'm sorry to say that, it's gone.
It has. And it didn't need to be this way, right? I mean, it could have so easily gone in a different direction.
Ian, look, we've lost to swivel-eyed, blue-haired people who aren't sure what they are and wave Palestine flags. They are the people who run this place. That Starmer's right behind them. It was no secret what they were going to do. A thing that might not be mentioned today, the population of this country increased by 700,000 in the last 12 months.
Yep.
Believe that if you like. It feels more like 5 million. And next year it'll be another 5 million. And, let's just say it won't be Brexit voting Chelsea supporters born in the southeast, people like me.
You're bang on, Michael. Thank you very much. It's a powerful point to finish on. Michael in Birmingham. Let's get a word from Greg in Edinburgh on what Mr. Starmer's been up to with his Palestinian pledge. Greg, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Ian. I'm just wondering whether, if he decides he's going to recognise Palestine as a sovereign state, that presumably means that he's going to have some sort of diplomatic relations with them. Now, we usually, when that happens, that we exchange ambassadors. And a chap comes along,
open an embassy and all that business.
Yeah. And a chap comes along and he presents his credentials to the king.
So does Mr. Starmer think, who's he going to choose? Yeah. Is he going to choose the man from the so-called government in Gaza, who's a terrorist according to the government's own legislation?
Yep.
Or is he going to choose someone from the West Bank and Fatah, where the president hasn't had a democratic election in about the last 25 years? And he thinks that that is a suitable person for us to recognise as a country.
Well, I mean, that's too logical, Greg, isn't it?
All it is, it's performative. As he does for everything is performance and weakness.
You do wonder who's... I mean, people have paid a lot of money. Some people have paid more than him to advise him. And you'd think, surely, you'd be getting your money's worth somewhere. Someone would go, Keir, mate, if you do this, you're just going to look like a plank. And if you follow that particular route, you're going to have ultimately no respect. You're playing to a very small gallery of people on this. And yet, you know, for some reason, it looks like he can't learn a single lesson. Talk about immigration, he'll talk about smashing the gangs. Means nothing at all.
Everything he does just confirms that he has to be the weakest, most ineffectual prime minister we've ever had.
Yeah.
And it makes this country just a mockery on the world stage.
Indeed it does. Greg, you make great points. Thank you, sir, for that. Great to talk. Greg in Edinburgh. And as Donald Trump put it, look, I know it's not all tickety-boo over there in America either. You know, Donald Trump is... You know, he's a great salesman, he's a raconteur, he's a big voice, he's a powerful voice. And, you know, when he speaks in that kind of cutting, if you're going to be cutting and you do it in a casual manner, it's so much more powerful than shouting in that respect. Very casually, very talkative. He's a nasty man, he's a horrible man. Like, it's a matter of basic fact when he speaks. There's no other view. It's just Donald's view. But it's very powerful. So, you know, I get that, and he does that rather well. And, of course, if you look behind the scenes in the United States, there's a lot of things that are falling apart a bit, not just the Epstein files, but all manner of other issues that he's still got to get to grips with. He's also only been there half an hour, so, you know, we give him some leeway on that. However, on the fundamentals, he kind of gets it right. And one of the reasons he got into politics is because he was watching all of these other half-wits get it spectacularly wrong, who couldn't just apply basic logic. Well, you want to stop the crowd? Well, just do this then. They go, oh, you can't really just do that because you upset a lot of people. Well, who gives a hoot? What about the majority that are more upset? What about that group? Maybe solve that. And when he said to Keir Starmer, it's all pretty simple. You know, get energy prices down, sort out immigration, drop taxes, and, you know, you could be home and dry. That. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you shortly. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one from Kevin in Barnstable. He says, what is obvious with Starmer is that he doesn't get it. He has no friends outside a very particular type. Or if he does, his ego is so delicate that nobody can tell him anything without risking making him cry. He's weak, feeble and misguided. I don't think you will see him the Emirates much this season. If you do, he'll probably be disguising himself as Nigel Farage so that he gets some love. Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing with Starmer, is that he is, like, you know, like a lot of... do you remember when David Cameron mixed up West Ham and Aston Villa based on the claret and blue, I would assume? And he talks about him being a Villa fan, and then he sort of accidentally said West Ham or something like that. Starmer has genuinely played football as well, like every week on a five-a-side team up until he became Prime Minister, and then he was a season ticket holder. So that should be, in any other world, you go, wow, we've actually got a Prime Minister that really is passionate. You know, when they talk about, oh, I love music, you know, really love music. Who do you really like? Oh, massive fan of, love Oasis. What's your favourite album? Oh, the best of. You know, that's what you normally get from a Prime Minister. Or when they pushed on. It was who was it? Zach Goldsmith once, who went to when he was the local MP, went to a Bollywood film festival in his constituency, and he made such a great deal of going, I can't get enough of this. I absolutely love Bollywood. I've loved it since I was a kid. A big genre favourite of mine. And the reporter went, what's your favourite film? And of course, he couldn't answer that question. Now, it might be a bit of a trick question, because you can, in fairness, be, enjoy the genre of something and not necessarily be able to instantly pick your fave. But my point was that Starmer genuinely is a football fan and plays it and knows it and loves it and has done forever. That should, in any other world, play really well for him. Not an election decider, but in terms of how we judge him as a person. You go, OK, he came from a moderate family, not really that working class for very long, son of a toolmaker, didn't you know, and loves his footy. And that would have been a sort of different kind of Prime Minister. But it hasn't worked out, because he's hopeless at all the other stuff. So we move to this story. It's one of our favourite areas when we talk about parking tickets, and it's the private parking industry that is really under the microscope this time. Not for the first time, by the way, but they're being urged to come clean about how often unfair parking tickets get overturned. According to the RSE, current appeals bodies publish little to no up-to-date data, leaving drivers in the dark. And the latest available figures show 94% of appeals sided with the parking companies, highlighting a serious lack of fairness. Let's speak to a man who knows his way around a parking ticket, Tony Taylor, who knows this area only too well. Afternoon to you, Tony.
Good afternoon, Ian.
I mean, I know these are all kind of cliches, but it's a bit Wild West out there, isn't it? I mean, it has been forever. These sort of companies, they start and then you realise that, they're part of a bigger company, and they're not, a fella around the corner that decided to start up a business. They're part of big empires, the APCOAs and this world that really own lots of stuff. Multi-million pound businesses. No wonder they don't overturn tickets very often.
That's it, because all private parking companies, they're ex-clamping companies, and the government told them to change their act. So they decided to put on very smart uniforms and pretending that they're above the law or within the law. But when they're issuing parking, there's two companies they've got to be members of. That's Poplar and the Independent Parking Committee. Now, Poplar are not too bad. If the appeal is declined, you can go to Poplar, and they're not too bad. There's about 30 assessors who will assess your claim. Now, the IPC, the Independent Parking Committee, I've got to tell you, I've been dealing with parking appeals for something like over 10 years. I've won over 12,000 appeals for the members of the public. Now, the Independent Parking Committee, the CEO, his name is Mr. Will Hurley. Now, Mr. Will Hurley was the owner of a debt company called Gladstone Solicitors. Now, the Independent Parking Committee decline, when their parking members decline an appeal, they say you've got the option to appeal to the Independent Parking Committee, who is owned by Will Hurley, who used to own Gladstone Solicitors. Now, he left Gladstone Solicitors to save looking like this conflict of interest, but he's still got his fingers in the pie there. And the Independent Parking Committee declined 99% of appeals. Yeah. And then suddenly you'll have a Gladstone solicitor's letter dropping on your doormat, demanding £170, threatening court. It's honestly, it's a Wild West. They're trying to make out they're doing everything correct, but they're not.
We should say Mr. Hurley, of course, is not here to defend himself, so we have no understanding of what he might say to that, in fairness. However, the overarching issue, whether you're dealing with that company or whatever company you're dealing with, it seems, you know, I suppose they work on two levels, don't they, Tony? Part of the I suppose the philosophy of those companies is that quite a lot of people just don't bother appealing because they think, I can't go through that labyrinthine mess.
That's what happens. Because of the ticket on the windscreen or the threatening letter comes through the post, a lot of people will pay to save the hassle. You know, they're frightened. So they'll pay their £40 or £60. They'll just pay up. But the ones who decide to fight it, what I do say is don't ignore your parking ticket, because there's a lot of armchair lawyers out there. They'll say, ignore it, they can't do nothing. Only the police and council can take you to court, or, you know, that's not true. Since 2015, that all changed. It went to the Supreme Courts, where parking companies can issue fines. Well, they're not fines, they're parking charge notices, but the parking companies dress them up to look like fines.
Yeah.
But don't ignore. But if you live in Scotland...
So they can take you to court?
They can, but it costs them a lot more money.
Yeah,
All they will do is pass your name to different debt collectors who will add on their little piece of profit. You know, but if you live in Scotland and Northern Ireland and you receive a private parking ticket, if you appeal, but say you're refusing to name the driver, there's nothing they can do, because in Scotland and Northern Ireland, there's no protection of Freedom of Information Act. They've got to prove that you was a driver, and they can't do nothing about it. But whereas in England and Wales, there is the Protection of Information Act, where they can hold the keeper liable if you don't name the driver.
I mean, it's an interesting field, because I've often thought to the heady fines that are imposed. You know, if you suddenly say to somebody, it's because it usually says, oh, it's £120 or 60 if you pay within 14 days. There's all of this kind of business. And I always think, well, you know, OK, I'm a professional man. I've got a good job. I can pay that. The amount of people that probably can't is huge, and that's a game-changing sum of money out of somebody's weekly or monthly budget.
It is a lot of money.
And it's the amounts involved. Simultaneously, I understand if you don't have any such thing as parking tickets, then it becomes mad and everybody just...
Oh, it'd be chaos.
People start parking on roundabouts and stuff. I do get that. What is the happy medium here, Tony? You know, how do we find where the line should be? How should these companies operate? How should they look?
Well, they should stop... the parking companies should stop offering their parking wardens incentives. I've got proof, which I didn't send to you. I've got proof of one certain parking company who offer their parking wardens £5 for each ticket they issue. Yeah, and there's quite a few parking wardens who have earned £70,000 in 1 year.
Blimey.
Now, I have seen the email of the parking company who sent out the email to all their wardens, thanking them for their very hard work, and we'll have a good party this year. And it's in the email where I think 10 of their wardens earned £70,000 in commission. So there should be no such thing as incentives.
I mean, that is incredible, that kind of money. Is there any appetite, as far as you can see, in Westminster to change this, to address this, to
I don't
give
know,
it some level of fairness?
They tried this before on the parking company. There's something happens behind the scenes. There's a lot of money involved. Even the DVLA make absolute millions every year. They sell your details to the private parking companies for £2.50 a time.
Wow.
And they make, I think, around about 80 to 100 million pound a year. That's just the DVLA.
Yeah. And that's from flogging the details, because you obviously have to subscribe to their database in order to...
That's it, yeah.
in order to get your details.
Yeah, and to get your details, you must be a member of the BPA or the Independent Parking Committee. You've got to be a member of them two associations before DVLA will give you the details.
Yeah.
Oh, it's very profitable.
It's worth a few quid. We're in the wrong job.
I think so. For 70,000 a year, I think we all are.
I mean, that's just for issuing them. That's let alone owning the companies. Goodness me. Yeah. Tony, thank you very much indeed for your time. Tony Taylor, parking ticket expert. It's the overturning the error that seems to be the problem. I don't know what wiggle room they give you. If you were, if you're given 5 minutes grace or 10 minutes or whatever it happens to be. A lot of these parking companies now, of course, don't even have traffic wardens. You just... you're filmed when you go in. They even do this at supermarkets. Where did I get nabbed? I don't think it was me, actually. I think it was my other half. She's always getting nicked on these ones. When you park somewhere and it's got a camera and you come out and you've forgotten to pay or you didn't even notice the signs, that can happen. No, I did. Sorry, I did. I was actually doing a job recently. I actually went for a meeting, at a hotel. And it was a hotel I knew well, but I hadn't been there for many years. And I drove into the hotel, parked up, oddly, where I used to park when I used to go to this place a lot, and then just left again. And then a month, 6 weeks later, whatever it was, and there's the little camera filming you going in and going out. I think, well, because all I needed to do was put my number plate in the detail, but I didn't see any signs of that. I walked into the foyer, saw the person I was there to meet, went, all right, mate, and then off we went, and that was it. I didn't see this thing. But that would be no defence, would it? Because they go, well, there's plenty of signs around. And you're not always looking for it, particularly in a hotel. It's not a hotel that you could park in and nip into town or next to the railway station or something, so you could use it as your day. It's not that kind of place. So you sort of wonder why it exists. Who would be advantaged by parking there when you're not meant to be parking there? But hey, that's another story. And you couldn't possibly appeal that, even though it would just be, I didn't see the signs, I didn't know you had to do it. They go, oh, well, when you walk in the foyer, there was a big sign there. But yeah, if you're looking at it, if you're not looking in that direction at that moment, it's very easy to... And of course, it's often based on that, because they must get dozens a day who are nabbed on that very route. Even where I live in Sevenoaks, there's a little greasy spoon. If you want to go in there, you've got to put your number into... There's a curry house in the same row of shops as well. You've got to remember to put your number plate into the thing, and then you're fine. But that is near a station, so I can see why people would possibly try and park there on a freebie. Let's go to Matt in Cheshire. Oh, Keir Starmer. Matt, how you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
And I hope you're the same, Ian.
All good at this end, yeah.
After sort of 12 months of moonlighting as a rational centrist person, a couple of peeks at polls from the new Hezbollah party.
Yeah.
And he's immediately been dragged straight back into the toilet of 2017 to 2019 with the Islamist anti-Semites, making everything he said about we have a new changed Labour Party, deeming that total nonsense. All Keir Starmer has done is hidden the fact that the Labour Party is exactly the same as it was under Jeremy Corbyn. He's kicked out a few people who are Corbynites, and they're still in Parliament. And I was watching a an interview with Zara Sultana yesterday, and even she said Labour is dead.
Wow.
So, literally, it's falling straight down the middle. It's being split in half, and
so it's happened. So what's happening to the Tory party is happening to the Labour Party, basically.
Yeah, but obviously, it took 14 years for the Tory party to become despised. It took less than 14 months for Labour to do the same.
Yeah, that's true.
At least the Conservatives had a period in office where people thought they were reasonably okay. So all he's done is looked at these polls and thought, oh my God, we're going to get obliterated. Yeah. He's not even really bothered about what people think. Do we really think Palestine is going to be a state? Will it be allowed to have weapons?
So why would he I mean, this is kind of, to some people, it's sort of political harry-carry, what's happening here with these parties, but particularly with Labour, because they're in power at the moment. But, which is why we started with the question on this, Matt. What is the logic? Well, what's his logic? Because he must have, even if we don't like the guy, he must have a reason for going down this, what some people see as a curious and even dangerous route.
I mean, you've been in the media for decades, Ian. Can you name one thing that Labour have done since coming into power that seems like a good idea?
Well, if you go online, our friends social media will have a load of lefties that will show you a big old bullet point list of everything they've done. And there's about 100 things on there. And you go through it, Matt, and you go, well, that didn't quite happen. That was the previous government. That was the last government. That was that thing called list theory, where you can create a list on anything and make it work in your favour to win your argument. But no, personally, Matt, I can't. I mean, I genuinely can't.
I've watched George Galloway videos. I watched the Zara Sultana interview with Not on Navarra Media. The left and the left hate him more than people
Correct.
on the right.
Yeah.
So he literally is the worst, most pathetic, mindless, useless, gutless, spineless, talentless abomination.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, Matt, at least with Blair, and this is what I was said right at the beginning about, even if you disagree with somebody, you can see their logic. Blair was attractive to many people as a politician because he was very good at what he did. He was quite, he's a sort of Bambi-looking, innocent-faced lawyer, but he had an idea that he wanted to change Labour from the old trade union organisation that it once was, dominated by these kind of powerhouses of, the Len McCluskeys and that kind of sort of militant tendency. And he did change it. And he had a belief that the world was better when run by bigger institutions like the EU and global organisations. Again, fundamentally disagree with it, but he wasn't hiding it. He believed all of that. So you could see where he was going, and you could see why some people thought, I'm quite safe in this guy's hands. And he also happened to inherit an economy from the Tories, even though they were dead back then in 97. But the economy was doing rather well. So everything was on the up. So he had the perfect storm. Everything was going tickety-boo. With Starmer, I honestly can't see any of that.
You just absolutely brilliantly pointed me in the direction of the only thing I've watched on the BBC with any interest is a new set of Adam Curtis documentaries. I'm not sure if you're aware of it.
No, tell me more.
You are. He's a BBC documentary maker. He makes political and it's basically the best documentaries you'll ever see on the BBC. It's called Shifty. It's about the end of Britain in the 20th century, the miners' strikes, and how the markets took over and sucked all the power from politicians. Basically, finance and the markets deemed all politics completely irrelevant.
100%, which is where our friend the WEF come into these discussions, because although politicians attend those things, and I get it, look, the world's got smaller. Businesses are going to talk to each other. They're going to say, this is the direction of travel. Politicians are usually rubbish. They don't invent anything or make any money. Businesses do. But you're absolutely bang on, Matt, that over the years, what we've had are businesses apparently, essentially calling the shots. Listen, I've got to move, Matt. You make a great point. I know, for some reason, Adam Curtis, and I don't know why that name is familiar to me, but there is a yeah. I'll look him up and find out more. More from you on the way. This is Talk.
You're absolutely right, Peter. It's an absolute disgrace. We've had the work. We thought it was bad enough when police officers were not investigating these things, when alleged community leaders could stop things, and we were told that not investigating grooming gangs was some kind of social cohesion. And now it's stepped into even more worse ground, that three officers have been arrested, retired officers. And I agree with you, and I agree with Professor Jay, who did the report into Rotherham in 2014.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's just, before we hand over to Peter Cardwell, some comments coming from you. Reference parking tickets. Debbie says, I had 2 notices come through because I did a 3-point turn and was caught on camera. They showed me driving in and apparently reversing out after being parked for 24 hours. I won the appeal. Oh, I see what you mean. So you used the kind of driveway of whatever it was to turn round and the camera clocked you in and out. Yeah, you see, they'll do stuff like that. Chris says, when caught speeding, we couldn't remember who was driving. I checked with the DVLA and they said the registered keeper would have to admit to the offence. Surely this can't be right. It's contempt of court, admitting to something you don't know whether you are guilty of. If a stolen moped was found in a house, I'm sure they would have to prove who actually stole it before any conviction could stand. It's a really good point. So it falls down to because it is possible that if you do a certain route and you interchange your driver, I never really thought of it like this. There's a couple of places we go where it could be me or my other half driving the car. So it's, at 20 past 7 it's like, well, it's likely to be me, but then, no, it could be, 6 months or 6 weeks down the line. You might genuinely not remember. I don't know. And Angry Brian says, I think we are overthinking Starmer's motives on a number of issues. He's a human rights lawyer through and through, with no empathy, being a coward, performative and focusing on displacement activity. For example, changing the law to prosecute soldiers, following the ICJ's advice on Chagos, his behaviour on visiting Southport, Trump's state visit taking place during Parliament recess, ignoring the immigrant crisis, both legal and illegal. The fiction of recognising a non-state and doing it after Trump leaves. The list goes on, while the real issues, such as appointing someone to chair the grooming gangs, doesn't happen. Angry Brian in Angry Britain, I'm tempted to say. Here's a very angry man. He's off the scale, for God's sake. Peter Cardwell is with us.
I was really interested when you were saying that story about the penalty points notice. That was, of course, do you remember the Liberal Democrat Chris Huhne?
Of course.
Who alleged his wife was driving the car. And Nick Clegg, after he resigned, said Chris Huhne was always very good at getting his points across.
She went to jail, of course.
She did. We're
Followed
talking
by a tag, as I remember.
Right, okay. Yeah. Lots to discuss today. We're continuing the discussion in regard to the recognition of Palestine. Hamas has praised Keir Starmer, saying it is a victory. So we're talking about that.
You really need that, don't you? If you're,
certainly.
Prime Minister, you are
endorsed by Palestine. Endorsed by Hamas.
And he's just interesting by another kind of conflict or contradiction. Only half an hour ago, he prescribed, a pro-Palestine group as a terrorist.
Palestine Action, so exactly. But now Hamas are praising him. We'll be talking about the fallout from the Peter Kyle row in regard to saying that Nigel Farage was on the side of Jimmy Savile. Also, the city boss suing neighbours for £25,000 over noisy dogs. The public says we should prioritise flights taking off on time over net zero. The jury as well in the Manchester airport incident has been told that it can return a majority verdict. It's conceivable that we could get a verdict on that. We'll not say anything for the meantime because we're under prejudice anything that's going on in court at the moment, but there are 11 jurors left. One of them has gone on holiday and been excused because they've gone on holiday. If 10 out of the 11 reach a verdict, we'll bring that to you during the course of the programme. And we'll be speaking to the former Conservative Health Minister Steve Bryan about the NHS chief accusing the BMA of extortion over rates of urgent strike cover, and getting our usual look back inside the sun as well.
Okay,
tomorrow.
what were you saying about dogs? Dogs barking?
Yes, so this is neighbours in, it's a part of London where there are 2 German Shepherds who are barking very loudly, and the neighbour is suing them for £25,000, saying that it has disrupted their children's education.
Where did they come up with 25 grand?
I don't know how you sort of calculate it.
12.5 grand per dog. I don't know how that works. Yeah. I mean, in my neck of the woods, leaf blowers, there's a problem with noise.
Right, yes.
There's a house just around the back of us, and every Monday